Good morning. I'd like to call the 388th Commission meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Ask that everybody check their cell phone, make sure it's on silent or vibrate. I'll do it myself. And before we move to approve the minutes, I'd like to recognize our outgoing commissioners. We had 4 commissioners that have I don't want to say retired, but were moved on to bigger and better things. We have one here with us. We'll talk about that in a minute. But our commissioner representing the equine industry was Mark Wheelis. He's replaced by Joe Leathers, who's sitting off to my right. Joe, welcome. Our exotic was represented by Dickie Winters for how many years?
Long time.
Long time. And is replaced by Tommy Oates. Tommy, welcome. General public, Mr. Brown, Randy Brown, has been replaced by Eric White. Eric, welcome. And Chuck Real was replaced by Jay Winter. Jay, welcome. Now, we have one of our old commissioners that came back, and I'd like to, did you get up, Dick?
Barely.
Barely.
It's much easier without the burden that Mr. Roach is assuming.
The meetings are going to go a lot quicker now. I served with your father back in the 90s and had the pleasure of serving with you for a lot of years. You're, in my opinion, have been one of the most dedicated commissioners. You take everything to heart, you work hard, and you demonstrate what it means to represent your industry, that you're obviously very proud of, and you have enlightened us with many stories that we really do appreciate and are going to miss.
Thanks, Ernie.
So, this plaque just basically says thank you for your years of work and commitment to this agency. Everybody appreciates it.
Thank you very much.
And if you would like to say a couple words, please.
You know I have. Way back when Ann Richards took a seat from the public and gave it to the industry. And our industry has been represented well for many years. Then I came aboard, and the industry survived anyway. It has been a real honest honor to serve with every member of this commission, and most importantly, with every member of the staff. And the ability to interact with the public has been great. I thank you very much, Mr. Oates. You've got a big task ahead of you. You're the man to do it. I'm glad that you're in that seat. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Ernie, I invited him back for a public comment on all the
I have a green card shredder back here with your name on it. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 2, approval of the minutes of the 387th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of the 387th Commission meeting. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve the minutes of the 387th meeting. Is there any discussion? None. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Ellis will now give his report of the Executive Director. Dr. Ellis, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and especially welcome to the new Commissioners here. We're happy to have you guys, and Dick, we're going to miss you as well. So, as well as the others that have left. So, for the new folks here, I'm going to try and back it down a notch and make sure I don't just assume you guys know what's going on. So, what I'm going to do right now is try and give you just a basic overview of what's going on within the agency, what's our current events, what's important, what's happened since the last meeting. and it's open forum, so you can stop me at any time and ask questions. There should be in your book a copy of my report, just bullet points. I don't write a narrative. I just put bullet points down and wing it off of that, and you got the gist of it. You can get it from those, and so we'll move forward at this time with my report. And I think, since the last meeting, and we haven't met in about 4 months, September, basically what this agency is trying to do right now is rebuild itself. We were fortunate enough with the support of our industry and stakeholder affiliates to get a good budget, and also had a number of legislative initiatives that were passed that should be beneficial to the agency. So what you see going on right now is the agency trying to rebuild its staff. We won't be as big as we were before, but we're actively hiring some people back in a strategic fashion, and that takes a lot of time and effort, and then to get them trained, and as well as start to react to the legislative direction that the agency was given in the last session. And so that's what we're going on here. Last meeting, you can see we had about 125 employees. We're at 140 right now, which means we've hired 15 people. That's 4 a month. We have one HR person that does hiring. We have another one that does benefits, but it's an active full-time job, and to do it right. And you can see our FTE cap's 161. I don't know that we'll ever actually get there. We'll be up and down around in the 150s. People are always coming and going, but I think at the next meeting we'll be bigger than we are now. We'll be 145 to 150, right in there. So, staffing is a huge part of our managerial oversight right now, and that's the part of this job. Many state vets do not manage agencies. They're just advisors, or they're folks that, have 1 or 2 people working for them. In this case, we're spending a lot of time running the agencies. What I'm trying to tell you, that's part of my job. That's a significant part of it, and I value that. I like it, but it is time consuming. So you're seeing us not only work on staffing, but when we had the downsize in 2011, one of the results of that was that we had to stop providing certain services, and in other cases we just slowed them down. And so part of our challenge now managerially is not only hiring new people and getting those folks trained, but getting the remaining people to realize we need to go back to doing the things that we used to do that we believe are important. And so we're going through quite a bit of internal evaluation and internal communication and direction and management and retraining, just to get folks back to doing the things that we believe we need to do as an agency. So that's what's going on. That's just day to day. A lot of our time is spent on that. You can see there the bullets. I just outlined a few of the more significant hiring processes going on right now. Dr. T.R. Lansford has taken over as the Assistant State Vet over Animal Health Programs and Emergency Management. He started last fall, but actually his first day in this office was this month, in January 1. So got a lot of work to do, and one of his first challenges is to hire his replacement in Beeville, and that person's going to start tomorrow. TR? So there we go, another new guy to train in the busiest region in the state, to be quite honest with you right now. Our South Texas has got so much going on for lots of reasons. Dr. Schwartz is in the process of interviewing to hire another epidemiologist. One of our biggest challenges I see, with half our agency eligible to retire right now, including most of executive management, I would say all of executive management except Dr. Lansford, is we have to have some succession planning. And so we're looking to bring in some more field epidemiological support. A lot of work out there, and so we're in the process of hiring another epidemiologist. The epidemiologists are the advisors to our field staff and partners to a certain degree on how to approach a disease investigation. So we should have another epi on board within a month, I would hope. We've got some field veterinarians we're going to hire back in 2011. We laid off the entire field veterinarian staff of the agency. There were 5 guys at that point. We're not going to hire 5 back, but we're going to hire 1 or 2 back for sure and put them in strategic locations. And then, of course, training will go with that. Emergency management dropped from 6 people to 1. We're back to 2, and then we went back to 1. As you can see, Amanda over here has been in emergency management for 5 years, is going to replace Carol Pavanka, who's retiring later this year. And so this is Amanda's first meeting in that spot. Welcome. The next meeting, you won't be here, and Carol will be back for 1 more meeting. because Amanda, where will you be?
Maternity leave.
Maternity leave. I wasn't going to say it. I don't want to get so you're going to see Carol be back one more meeting in the spring, and then she's going to retire this summer. So we started that succession planning. There's the successor to Carol right there. And so welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
And also, you'll see later in the meeting, Jeff Turner's going to come up. He's our acting emergency management coordinator, and he's most likely going to take Amanda's place. You know, we have to post that job internally and go through some things, but obviously he's very well qualified to move up. And so there are a lot of changes within the agency culturally, strategically, managerially, and so that's just, we ask that y'all be patient with us as we work through all these things. Also on the purchase side, you can see there, I just put some examples. You know, we were lucky enough to have some capital expenditure funding applied to the agency, and it's our intent to try and provide as many vehicles as we can to our field employees. It's quite a job overseeing those. You know, we went from no vehicles to a few. We're up over 50 now. We're to the point now where we're starting to retire some of our vehicles, and it's an active job managing our fleet. And so we're in the process of buying new trucks and reassigning trucks based upon mileage and things like that. Whoever drives the most obviously needs the most dependable truck. Kind of that's our strategy there. So you're going to see that. We have on the budget for you an emergency management trailer for approval. We've been borrowing trailers. We've got a trailer with a hole in the floor. We've just not had any equipment. And we routinely use these trailers when we're not in emergency response. We use them for normal field response activities like Pyro County testing and El Paso dairy testing and different things. So we need one good trailer. And so we're starting to use that money that we had appropriated for equipment that's important to the agency. Merit raise process. We've had merits on hold for almost 4 years now, and so we're working through opening that process back up to be a little more flexible with our managers and not micromanaging it or stopping it completely. So you're starting to see again some training and just a lot of communication with our managers and how do you go about spending a little bit of money. We were able to give our inspectors a raise across the board, and so the funding from the last session we put to use in our field, and that's gone to our field. Those folks all got a pretty good jump in their salary. So those are the kinds of things that are going on within the agency. You know, this spring, a couple of things. We're always hitting deadlines for different outside requirements. This spring there'll be two in summer. The agency will be in the normal process of reevaluating its strategic plan and updating the legislative appropriation request for the next biennium, which will be coming. You know, the session will start about a year from today, more or less, and so we'll be working with Chairman Morales, and I've already had one conversation on this. I'll be working with you guys to get input into that process and to make sure that we're transparent and make sure that we're responsive and make sure that we get it right as we move through the spring and the summer with what are otherwise 100-page documents that, you know, some of it is just things that we don't have a lot of flexibility on, and some things we can actually change. So I look forward to working with the chairman and the commissioners this spring and summer as we get ready for the next legislative session and the reports that are due in response to that. If you go to page 2 of my report, I think, you know, y'all are going to vote on proposed rules and vote on passage of rules later in the meeting. In my opinion, in my career, I don't remember a more substantive set of rules for you to consider, a more diverse set of rules, a more trending and cutting-edge set of rules. I'm very proud of these things. I want to thank all the commissioners that have worked with us. This has been quite a time-consuming process. To write even an easy rule is still a major book report, but to start a rule from scratch with nothing to copy, nothing to look at, it takes a lot of time and effort, and I especially want to thank our legal section and Gene and Mary and Sally for all their hard work. And then we're tapping routinely, we're identifying managers in the field and in this office to help with this. And so when we bring a rule to you for proposal, it has had a number of agency staff folks put their fingers on it and look at it and refine it, as well as often many industry folks and you guys as well. So put up here, there's 5 rules up for passage today, and I'm just going to talk briefly about each one of them, especially we got some new guys here today, so I want to make sure y'all all understand this. 4 of the 5 rules for passage are results of legislation that was passed last year, and so these were proposed at our September meeting. So during the summer, we actually wrote those rules in reaction to legislation directing the agency to do certain things or empowering us to do certain things depending on the situation. And those have been voted on once, and they're up for consideration again today. The fever tick rule is just a Texas thing. There's no one else that has fever ticks issues, so you know it's been it's an ongoing threat to the agency, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that rule, we had legislation in the past, basically updating a lot of our terminology, acknowledging that you can do more than just dip a cow now. You have injectables and different treatments for ticks, and also there's some identification requirements and vaccination requirements, and I'll talk about that when I get to that part of my topic. Poultry, giving the agency the authority to depopulate and indemnify. We hope we never have to use this, but in the past we've needed this authority and didn't have it, and so this will, if the agency needs to direct a person, more likely this would be for backyard small folks, not the commercial folks where we would have to direct someone to depopulate. We have that authority, and now we can recompensate them if needed for that. Texas Authorized Vet Program, I'm very proud of this rule. This is the first in the United States. I can tell you there are a number of other state animal health agencies looking at what we're doing right now, and they're gonna emulate it, follow it, copy it, steal from it. I want to thank Texas Veterinary Medical Association and the veterinarians in the state for their support and their help in crafting what is basically today going to be a framework. This will be a work in progress for many years, but it's a reaction to a change from the Animal Health Commission is just the brucellosis agency to a multi-species, very diverse animal health organization that's involved with many regulatory functions that veterinarians and their technicians are involved in, and so it's just kind of recodifying what we were already doing, but it was enabling legislation, and now this is enabling rulemaking that will allow us to continue to work with veterinarians across the state to make the best programs we can on behalf of the industries that we regulate. Animal disease traceability, again, there was legislation passed in the spring. Directive type legislation. We had working groups of the cattle industry. I believe this rule is meeting the intent of that working group. Double checked with everybody. I haven't heard there's anybody that doesn't like this. I'm not sure where they're at right now, so I don't think there's any, as in the past, I don't think today there's any controversy. We'll let the speaker speak if someone has something to say. But again, I'm very proud of this rule in that I'm watching the other states right now in their dialogue, and the state vets, we are a community. We talk to each other every day. Every day I talk to 3 or 4 state vets. In Texas, by nature, they ask for our advice. They want to know what we're doing, and I believe we're the first state that I'm aware of to propose a rule that's less strenuous than the federal rule, but still somewhat accountable to the folks involved to make sure that at the end of the day, breeding cattle have a permanent official ID and slaughter cattle are able to move on a back tag. And the 7-day rule giving flexibility is slightly problematic but workable, and you know, as long as we're all working together, we can figure that out. And we're the only state that has done this. They're either in or they're out, and there's a lot of states that still have no state ADT rules, and they're not really sure what to do. So we're ahead of the game, and again, I'm proud to be involved with that. And on the trichomoniasis rule, again, we have a working group, and Commissioner Locke, I guess that group will need to meet again in a couple of 3 months, and the rules that you have up for passage today are a result of decisions that were made within that working group last May, and then it just takes that long to get a rule passed. And the best thing I can do to keep this straight is we've got 2 similar rules. If a guy buys an adult cow, he has 7 days to tag it, kill it, or resell it, and if he buys an untested bull, he's got 7 days to test it, kill it, or resell it. It's kind of the same kind of concept with trick and ADT, and it's kind of a way that we're making sure our folks understand it, and at least I can keep it straight in my mind as well. There's some rules up for proposal. Again, there's a cutting-edge rule related to calf ranch dairy industry, and I want to thank Commissioner Bauma for all your help. And this rule for proposal is partially from lessons I learned in California on their national review last fall that I participated in. California has a number of quarantine dairies. Luckily, we don't have one right now, but one of the challenges with the quarantine dairy is trying to keep them in business without the rules bankrupting that dairy. And so this is an attempt for business continuity to allow a structured environment for dairies that need to salvage the maximum value for their bull calves and their dairy calves. And we're the first ones to do it. Commissioner Bauman, I and our staff and our industry have given this a lot of thought, and this is a shell as well. The policy will be fleshed out when and if we need it, and there could be some risk-based decisions on the details of the criteria for managing quarantined exposed baby dairy calves, depending upon the risk. In other words, we may have separate processes for a dairy with 100 infected cows versus a dairy with 1 infected cow, and so we're going to keep this very flexible. And again, I had 2 state vets contact me yesterday to talk about this. They were very interested in this rule. We're ahead of USDA. USDA's, I don't know what they're going to say, but this is the right thing to do, and so we're going to move forward with this rule. Live bird market, here's your chicken fence rule. It's kind of funny in a way, but we had some live bird markets where their chickens were running loose and flying across the road and getting in the neighbors' trees, and it's just not good biosecurity because our live bird markets, for any of the new commissioners, when and if you're ready to go see one, it's quite a field trip, and those guys, they're a viable, thriving industry. They make a lot of money. They're a good business, but there are some biosecurity considerations that it's our responsibility to work with them to make sure they don't put our poultry industry at risk, and one of them is you don't want the chickens mixing with the ducks and flying around, and so this is a rule that would require a person in the live bird market industry to have satisfactory fencing. But we had to pass a rule to make this happen. Equine plasmosis, the rule, again, first in the United States. Some other states have also had problems where infected horses have disappeared. And this says, hey, if you're infected, if we classify your horse infected, we want a microchip put in that.
Will we be doing that?
We will
Our
give the owner the choice. They can have their veterinarian do it, or they can ask our veterinarians to do it. And that'll be a training role for us this spring and summer to make sure we know how to do it right. But we're going to give the owner the choice. Declaration of Mexican origin on CVIs and test charts. We have a number of rules related to tuberculosis for Mexican origin rope and steers, exhibition animals, and also we have oftentimes tuberculosis traces, especially with slaughter traces with cattle that have come out of Mexico on the feeder side. And this is just a rule telling veterinarians that if they know the animals are Mexican, branded basically, when they are testing them or writing a health certificate, write it on the chart. These are Mexican animals. This will help us with our traceability and disease searches for feeders especially, and on the rope and steer side, we have entry requirements, and right now we're not able to verify at all that there's compliance with those. And the Mexican rope and steers, are the highest risk population. So this is, we think, a fairly innocuous rule, but it's important to our ability at the level to track and figure out where the animals have come and gone for disease protection against the rest of the cattle industry in the state of Texas. And then the ADT cleanup rule down there at the bottom, you're going to always see, we're going to probably have ADT minor tweaks for years to come as we continue to evaluate the federal rule. We realize on the state side there needs to be some tweaks, and so this proposed rule is just a cleanup. Move on. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the most important disease or species programs. And the way this works is I'm going to try not to get into the weeds, and I'm going to let Dr. Schwartz, as our state epidemiologist, he'll come up here in a minute and he'll give you a little more detail about some specific disease information. I'm going to try and talk to you about it from the macro level, just from the executive director level. My take, maybe, especially if there's any political considerations or just public awareness things you guys need to know. So we try very hard not to repeat ourselves. It's a little bit difficult, but some of this you're going to hear twice, once from me and then once again from Dr. Schwartz. But we hopefully will not say the same things if we can help it. On the animal ID or on the animal disease traceability side, the rule that's up for passage today, if you choose to pass that, is the state rule. the state rule going into effect in mid-February, and that's the rule for cattle, adult cattle only, not calves, but adult cattle only. It just basically says, the intent is we want breeding animals to have a permanent official ID, an ear tag type ID, quote unquote. And our staff is meeting personally with every sale barn owner in the state. We started meeting with our staff in December. The last meeting with our region staff was last Friday in Hempstead, and they've been told to get after this. And so they're in the process of meeting with market owners right now to make sure the market owners understand how this affects them and how it doesn't affect them to a certain degree. And our goal is to have those meetings finished by the end of January. And so when they go to talk to the market folks, they're actually going to talk to them about three things. The federal rule, and I want to go through this so y'all get it straight because it's confusing. The federal rule for animal disease traceability was passed last year, and it only applies to animals crossing the state line. If they're not crossing the state line, the federal rule is not in play. But for markets that bring and ship and receive animals across the state line, they have to understand and comply with the federal animal disease traceability rules. If the cow in Texas being a big state, probably most of our animals are not, the federal rule doesn't apply. That's the Animal Health Commission rule, and that's the rule that I was telling y'all basically says for adult cattle, breeding cattle, if they're going back to the country, they need to have an ear tag. If they're going to go to slaughter, they can move on a back tag. If they're going to go to slaughter, but they're going to be fed first, they need an ear tag because the back tag will fall off. And if you're the buyer of one of these animals, you've got 7 days to choose. So the burden of this rule that you're considering is on the buyer. It's not on the market. It's not on the seller. Those two entities technically don't have to do anything if they don't want to. For the most part, I think we're going to see most of the markets in the state of Texas are going to become tagging facilities and provide that service. But it's certainly up to them at what level they tag animals. Some are tagging everything, some are tagging very little. But if their clients are going to buy and move animals that are our breeding animals out of that market, then the clients have only 7 days to get them tagged. What we'll see is some rail buyers and some folks that are in that business decide they want to be tagging facilities themselves. So they're going to take them back to their pens, and they're going to say, well, this week I'm taking these to the slaughter plant, but next week the market has changed and maybe I'm going to turn them out on oats. Well, if they want to do that, then they'll need to tag them. And so we're going to be working not only with the market owners, but feedlot owners, managers that feed adult cattle, and anyone in the cattle business that may be buying and selling adult cattle and might have the opportunity to not quickly get them to the slaughter plant or resell them. And so those folks, just like we have feeding facility agreements with folks for trichomoniasis where they can take an untested bull and feed it themselves, some of those same folks are going to decide they're going to want to become tagging facilities, and if that's the case, we'll work with them to get the tags. They'll have to fill out the form that basically says, I promise to follow the rules of a tagging facility, which is I'll keep my records and I'll use the right kind of tag, and that's about it. And those will all be kept at their place. They're not going to send them into us, and we won't ever really interact with them unless we need the information.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Private sales and registered special sales, things like that.
Well,
You'll go with a tattoo and a brand or?
Registered fire brands and tattoos that can identify the animal to the original owner or the owner are acceptable. And so our interaction with special sales, registered sales, video sales, all those kinds of things is going to be just like it was when we had a brucellosis test. It's going to be mainly on the honor system. We're going to probably, the large sales for sure, we're going to probably contact them, our field staff, and just say, hey, make sure you understand the rules. Also, do you understand the trick rules if you're selling bulls, breeding bulls? And so they'll be on an honor system. I'm not going to say we'll do 100% of them, but for the most part, we will be. It's our job at the field level to make sure they understand the rules, and if they have any questions, we'll help them with them. We will go to some of those. We won't go to all of them based upon locations and times. But you know, no rule is going to work without the goodwill of the industry. I think at this point, there's as much goodwill as you can get about an animal ID rule based upon what the wording is. This language, giving a buyer 7 days to figure it out and let slaughter cattle move on a back tag, I believe all the major stakeholder organizations were okay with that. And so if that's the case, whether it's a purebred organization or just someone having a special sale from their ranch, the encouragement and the climate of cooperation, I believe, is there that they're going to comply. But it's our job to make sure that's the case, and we'll work with them in a professional and facilitatory manner or not. We're not going to go fight anybody over animal ID, but we will. It is our responsibility to make sure that they understand the regulations, which are crafted through the intent of the industries. So, does that kind of answer your question? So, and Dr. Schwartz is actually the immediate supervisor over our animal ID process, which includes databases and all kinds of things with interstate entry movements and permits, and he'll have a little more information down a level from my take, which is I believe and I hope that the rule that's up for consideration does meet the intent of the industry. And if that's the case, then I think there'll be voluntary compliance with it. Trichomoniasis, for the new guys, again, this is a voluntary program that started about 4 years ago. It's a venereal disease of cattle. We choose to deal with primarily through regulation of bulls, and we have a working group that meets once a year. Because it's a voluntary program, there's no federal oversight. There's no federal rules telling us what to do. In some of the traditional disease programs, tuberculosis, brucellosis, equine infectious anemia, pseudorabies in hogs, there are federal rules that tell us to operate within these parameters. But with trichomoniasis, there's no federal program, so we can do as an industry and as a state whatever we choose to do. And so the process that was set up is once a year we'll meet with the industry, the cattle industry, and affiliated stakeholders, veterinarians, and different folks that, and tweak it. And so the last working group is in May. The rules were proposed in September. They're up for passage today. And as you can see there, one of the requests was to allow untested bulls to move in commerce for up to 7 days before they have to either be tested, agree to be tested, or go on to a slaughter or a feedlot. And this is what the Animal Health Commission does. We have inspectors at markets. We can regulate the process. We believe it will help help with the value of the sale of bulls. If truthfully what happened is some market owner said, if I could buy that bull and resell it in another market or hold it and resell it in my market the next week, I could raise the value of that bull, which would help the seller. And they asked, could we regulate that? So the deliberation was, what's the risk versus the reward? And we believe that we can regulate this fairly easily. There's not going to be that many bulls in this class anyway, and so is it a zero risk? No, but the TRIC program in Texas is a control program, not an eradication program, and so that was kind of the mindset. And that group will meet in May, and I would encourage you guys, if anyone has any ideas or thoughts or questions for that group to deliberate, please let us know. And any of you, of course, are welcome to come. Commissioner Locke is the leader of that working group that meets in May. One last thing on TRIC that may bring us back to the table is the national initiative to try and align TRIC entry requirements between states. And actually, the state of Texas is pretty much in agreement with the most important parts, but there are states that still like to certify virgin status, and there are a few states that still use a culture rather than a computerized PCR test. And we don't accept those anymore. Mainly it was out of convenience and just trying to be simple about it. And so we may, at the discretion of the working group, whether they want to be a team player with the other 50 states or they just want to stand on our own, we may actually have to come back and revisit some rules to go back to the way things were. Not because they're better, but because they're probably not that important in the greater scheme of things, but they'll show that Texas is complying with the initiative at the national level on behalf of the producers to make the rules simple. And that's what it's about. Can we not be all over the place with different entry requirements? And that's the problem when you don't have a federal oversight. When you don't have a federal program, every state does it the way they want. Some states do it well, some don't do it well, some don't know what they're doing, some don't have programs still. So that's the point, and that'll be one of the topics that we'll need to talk about in May. Plasmosis, I mentioned the rule. We continue occasionally to have horses, mainly with Mexican connections, disappear. And this is, we now have a treatment option that's viable, but by applying a microchip, you can't see it. It's not a brand, it's not a tag, it's not anything that could taint the value of that horse later if it gets treated and is released from its quarantine. But it will allow us to have some traceability on some of these, especially some of these lower end race horses that might disappear from a track or a stable setting, and then they're in a Sunday afternoon match race somewhere. If we chose to, this way we could possibly identify those horses. We will have Dr. Schwartz, I'm going to let him give you all the information. We will move on to another county test or a partial county test as we attempt to corral the pyroplasmosis problem in far south Texas, which is related to the climate, the environment, some tick-infested pastures that we're being successful on. I'll let Andy talk to you all about that. Our challenge right now is that we are a small agency, and our priority is to meet the intent of the legislation to do a dairy risk assessment in El Paso. And so we're not going to get started on the next county, which will be part of Brooks County, until after we get the El Paso testing kind of out of the way in February. And we'll probably have up to over 10, maybe 15% or 20% of our agency in El Paso for a couple of weeks, maybe up to a month. We had 18 people there last week. We only have 150, so and USDA is helping us as well, obviously. But that's the kind of thing we're on a time crunch. That report has to be finished by September. So we need to get our testing evaluation out of the way before it gets hot, basically. And so as soon as we get to a kind of a stabilized situation in El Paso, then we'll start to work on the Pyro County test. And again, these are the kinds of places where that trailer that's on the budget for approval is kind of thing that we'll move it around and use it as a command center, an office, as a portable office for our field staff. And so just be aware that Andy will have more information about pyroplasmosis in general. Brucellosis, we're continuing to adjust to the change. As I mentioned to y'all in September, slaughter testing is basically stopped nationwide except for 11 slaughter plants, 2 of which are in Texas. We were able to negotiate to keep Lone Star. The original USDA report just wanted to test cattle at LNH. We felt that wasn't a good enough sampling of Texas cattle, and it was kind of regional in a way. And so we were able to persuade them to allow the continued blood collection at Lone Star and LNH, which actually helps us with other disease traces, verification of slaughter and different things. And so we're working on that. Our laboratory is now a national resource. We are the backup lab for the United States for brucellosis surveillance, and we're a regional lab that's running some selected slaughter blood. And as I said, we're running all our own slaughter blood for sure. And it's about 400,000 or 500,000 samples a year out of those 2 slaughter plants. And the Yellowstone rule that was passed and put into effect last time, asking for a retest of breeding cattle coming out of the designated surveillance area of Greater Yellowstone Park, parts of 3 states. You can see there that we've issued 17 permits, about 625 heads so far. That's in the first 3 months. So if you multiply that by 4 or 5, that's about how many we're going to get a year, 3,000 to 4,000 head of adult breeding cattle out of those regions. The Montana state vet, who's my good friend, came down and eloquently pled for relief. Announced the next week they had 2 newly infected cattle herds, and so they're just in a challenge up there to try and manage this. And so we'll continue to watch this and evaluate it. We're going to have a call with those guys in the next few weeks and just try and say, hey, we've been doing this for 3 months now. What can we do to tweak it and make it better? You know, one of the problems we're getting into is that the veterinarians in those states, there's a learning curve for them writing health certificates to meet our entry requirements. Sometimes they're saying, well, we don't really know where they came from. And even more amazing to me, we're not really sure whether they're heifers or adult cows. And so we're working through some contingencies and communications with them, as well as we're going to do some spot checking. We had one veterinarian that said, I don't know where these came from, and we checked them, and about 20 head in the consignment were out of this designated surveillance area. So we're going to continue to do some spot checking on that. But it's completely a flexible process. On bottom of page 4, the authorized personnel, as I mentioned, our veterinary industry, again, thank you to TVMA for their support. And this will be a long process. This rule's proved to be more complex in writing than we anticipated. And again, there's no one to copy from. We're the first state to do this, basically creating a state accreditation process for all disease programs for veterinarians. We're not going to get in any hurry with it. What you're going to consider here today is just a shell of the rule. But we had 1,900 veterinarians that are brucellosis approved. We're going to grandfather them in to this new rule, which is not just brucellosis. It's approved for all disease programs, whether it's trick or horses or deer or cattle or whatever they may do. And so our focus will be on new veterinarians. and from out of state. The graduates we're going to take care of at A&M. We're going to need to go back over to the vet school and tweak the curriculum a little bit. We're going to start to partner with the major veterinary symposium, Southwest Veterinary Symposium, which is a multi-state meeting once a year, and the TVMA has an annual convention, and we'll start to provide continuing education and certification classes for folks that need this at those, as well as we'll do it in-house. And so I'm going to evaluate internally. We've got to look at our staff and decide if we have someone here that can take on this role, if we're going to have to hire somebody or change some jobs. This is a big role. You know, we have 2,000 vets that are brucellosis approved, and let's just say we'll just keep it at that. Just if you're just managing 2,000 veterinarians and all the things that can go on there, it's going to be a significant undertaking for us to do it right, and we want to do it right. And so we're taking a look at that, and that will affect our staffing. We also want to sit back down with the veterinarians in the state and talk about if there's any opportunities with the vet technician classification that's going to become active in September as a result of legislation, basically the equivalent of a registered nurse. Is there any interaction we need in this process with technicians of veterinarians that may be handling blood, maybe or actually collecting samples, filling out test charts, those kinds of things? Is there any minimal, maybe just educational opportunities for us to be a vet technician that you had a 2-hour class or a 1-hour class or as part of their curriculum? So it's actually a good thing. We'll sit down and work that out, as well as we will begin this spring. First, we have to train our own people to make sure we're on top of it, but we're going to work with the cervid industry and create a process where cervid owners that are in CWD status programs, if they want to collect their own brain stems and submit it to the laboratory, if they'll take our little training class and follow the rules and regulations and understand what's required for shipping and paperwork, they're going to be allowed to do that. They can already do it now. This rule doesn't legalize it. They're already doing it every day. This just says if you're going to do it, you need to be trained by us and do it the way we want it, so that the samples are valid and et cetera, et cetera. And the one promise I have made to the veterinary industry, which I intend to keep, if there's ever a live animal test, a blood test, or anything like that, then we believe only veterinarians should be able to do that, and of course, Animal Health Commission personnel. So this rule will work with those folks until a better test is available, and if that's the case, then we'll go back and visit with the veterinary industry about how to do that appropriately, which is veterinarians, because we don't let a cow owner bleed his own cow and send it in for a disease or a pig or whatever. And so if there's ever a live test for chronic wasting disease, we believe that should be the same setup. But right now, there's nothing out there except to take the brain out of a dead animal. And so we're going to work with the owners for economic viability and help them until we can get a better test. Cattle fever tick program, this is on page 5. I double-checked again today with the USDA staff. You know, the U.S. government was shut down for about a little less than a month in October, but they basically shut down the valuation of our vaccine until this week. And so what I thought was going to start last fall, I think we will be lucky if it starts in February. There's one last vaccine trial that's needed. It's a 90-day trial only on the safety. Basically, they're going to give shots to some animals and make sure they don't get a big abscess. It has nothing to do with efficacy. We know the vaccine works. The company that's making the vaccine is in the process today they have a meeting today, internal meeting, and they've got their master seed, the vaccine, basically the recipe of the vaccine finished, and they're waiting for USDA, Center for Veterinary Biologics, to evaluate that final evaluation and give the go-ahead. We've been continually told that USDA CVB can do that within a month or less, and so we have a U.S. company making this, but with the U.S. shutdown of the government, just affected in October, we didn't get any slaughter blood from slaughter plants with brucellosis. I'll just say that. We got no slaughter blood in the month of October, so it affected our disease programs in a lot of ways, but it delayed this vaccine. So we're going to continue to work with them. I'm almost afraid to promise you guys anything other than the rule you're going to pass today will enable us to begin to work with the cattle owners down in the systematic zone, which I'm being told right now is only about 5,000 head. They're about 50% vacant down there as a result of the drought and just never restocked. But our intentions are to provide free vaccine to these ranchers to strengthen that buffer zone, as well as in the rural, provide free RFID tags so we can keep a better inventory and a summary for traceability. And I don't want to wait any longer on that. I thought we could just do it all with the vaccine, but so Dr. Varner and I will of USDA, he'll talk in a minute. We're going to go ahead and start that process on the tagging side in probably in March. We've got some training to do with our own folks, again, related to the computers and their like Bluetooth type technology, and there's some little tweaks we have to do there. But no one's going to have to pin their cattle to put a tag in it, but as those ranchers down there pin their cattle starting this spring for a normal process of inspections. And if you live down there, have cattle down there, you can't move your cattle out of the zone without inspection. As we do that, we're going to start to apply these free RFID tags so we can strengthen our inventory system in the zone. And so we'll be working on that. We'll be working, TSCRA has a fever tick committee. We may visit with those folks again. We also intend to send letters and to visit personally with every rancher in that zone who's going to get a personal contact by a state or federal employee to talk about it. So we want to make sure they all understand it, but it should be of minimal impact. No one's going to have to catch their cattle this spring to tag them. When we get the vaccine, we are going to have to talk to them about, putting the vaccine in them. That's going to be next fall at the earliest. But it's going to be a very important tool to protect us. Our numbers are low right now, but they will eventually come back. The numbers are related. We can take all the credit we want, but a lot of ways the numbers are related to climate, rainfall, vegetation, things that make ticks live longer than they would. So anyway, tuberculosis. In your book there is an article. I write an article every 2 months for the veterinary magazine in Texas, and there's an article I wrote in there about tuberculosis. And I would encourage y'all to read that. I believe tuberculosis is the biggest disease threat our agency deals with. It's definitely the biggest disease threat to our cattle industry, and we're continuing to work on transparency of processes with USDA on cattle crossing from Mexico on the feeder side, transparency of processes primarily with the New Mexico Livestock Board. Most of the roping steers are going through Santa Teresa Port in New Mexico, and you can speculate why they're going to that one port. I'm not even going to say, but this is another reason why the rule's important that says, hey, if you're coming into Texas, the health certificate needs to say these are Mexican animals. It'll help us at this level be able to see at least the crossing of these animals. If we can link the papers from Old Mexico with the papers from the New Mexico Livestock Board coming into Texas, we got a chance to figure out where they're going, because we have an entry requirement that Mexican roping steers, mainly from Chihuahua, have to be retested by a U.S. veterinarian 60 days after arrival. Right now, we can't do that. We just we cannot find them. So the El Paso Dairy Bill, Dr. Schwartz is our instant commander for that. I've delegated that process to him, and he's doing a great job with our staff. It's a good study, and I'm going to let him talk about that. But it is consuming quite a bit of our agency staff time for the next 2 or 3 months, and then that's just the testing, and then the report, actually writing the report is a whole other process, which is getting information from Mexico and getting information from USDA and getting information from the dairy folks, and then we'll put together a comprehensive conclusion that may or may not result in coming to the commission maybe next fall with a consideration for changing the zones. There's been no decision made. We're already getting letters and emails from people that are mad about it. They don't want to do it. They don't even want us to do the study. I have no problem doing the study. We're open-minded about what we're going to find, to be quite honest. So I'll let Andy talk about that. But we're working closely with the elected officials out there, and AgriLife Extension has been a great partner as well in helping us set up some public meetings. And have 2 public meetings next week, and one in Hudspeth County and one in El Paso County for our anticipated testing, which is in February. Chronic wasting disease just finished up a partnership with Texas Parks and Wildlife on collecting mule deer samples for CWD during the hunting season. Andy's also our servant leader, so I'm going to let him tell you that. But, we've got opportunities it went fine. We have lots of opportunities for improvement, and we're going to do after-action report on that and take a look at our staffing, our equipment, our locations, our communication, Parks and Wildlife, and probably come back next year and do it again and probably do it much better. But I'll let Andy give you the details on if there were positives and where. I don't think there were. I don't think there's any new positives, but I'm not sure if there are any, but I'll let him give you that information. But just let you know, again, that was in the fall. Again, a process that probably 20% of our agency at some point or another participated in sample collection for protection of our served industry statewide. We're doing that to help make sure we have good surveillance out there, and it's entirely possible that we could come back and talk to you all about some tweaks to our rules related to those zones next fall as well. As I finish my report, and also we're going to work with new Commissioner Oates and the Exotic Wildlife Association, other associations. Dick, we want to keep you in the loop for advisement. There is a national chronic wasting disease rule out for comments that we're definitely, as an agency, going to comment on related to the standards for surveillance of CWD, some of which are probably punitive or just deal breakers to stay in business. And that's a national debate on whether that should be a zero risk program versus a risk-based program, and it's philosophical, and there's other factors driving why people want to do one or the other. We're kind of caught in the middle. The elk industry in general, though, is on the books. They've been put on notice already that they need to get some surveillance in elk, and if we don't get substantive surveillance in elk from some fashion, you may see some rules coming back for consideration next fall, as well as possibly some legislative changes either from internal or external stakeholders that drive that if the elk industry doesn't do a better job of getting some slaughter surveillance from whatever fashion. Again, there's no live tests. We have to get brains, and we look forward to working with Commissioner Oates and everyone to see if there's a way that we can improve that. At the end of my report, I'm required to tell you guys the waivers that I do. I did 7 of them here, and you can see that 5 of the 7 were trick waivers, and 2 of the 7 were brucellosis related, and mainly, we don't always approve them. Just happened this time I approved them all. Mainly, a common waiver would be someone say, well, I need to bring my bull home and my pen's burned down. I don't have any way to test it in Wyoming. Can I do it when I get to Texas? That kind of thing. We will allow that. We follow up on it. We give them permission. We had a couple like that. You have a rule on the books today that will allow bulls to come back to Texas from feeding trials in other states. These are usually young virgin type bulls, big yearlings, and maybe 2 by the time they come back. And they're not going to have to get a waiver anymore if they go to this dry lot feeding trial and they're coming back to the ranch of origin. They've not been with other cows. Rule would allow them to come. And one of the things, Commissioner Locke, that I realized that we need to talk about at the next trick working group yesterday was the reverse of that. Do we want to let an Oklahoma virgin bull come to a feeding trial in Texas without a trick test and then go back? If they're over 12 months of age, our rules require it. And actually, you'll see I had a couple waivers where I let them do that. So I don't know, but that's the kind of things that the trick working group will work on. A couple of brucellosis, where we had actually exotics, a pronghorn and a scimitar oryx that had a brucellosis test, but it was out of our time frames. They're within the controlled environments. One was a zoo animal, and the other was going to a wildlife park that we have a good working relation with, and so I allowed them to come in with a little bit more than a 30-day negative brucellosis test. The last page, every time I just try and throw out there for y'all to be thinking about possible rule considerations. Anything you see here, the commissioners that are involved with that, we will not do anything without talking to you and getting your concurrence. Actually, there was some last time. I remember there was one I talked to Dr. Vickers about related to vets. He said, no, I don't want to do that. So this is nothing other than my attempt to let y'all know how diverse our agency actions are right now. And you can see we're all over the place. We believe there'll be vet authorized personnel rules just because it's a new program. We believe there'll be some more ADT rules because it's a new program. There may be trick working group changes. Those are almost guaranteed to have some minor rules. We're going to start at the next meeting asking for a routine review of Chapter 2 each time, just as part of the process where an agency needs to have the public get the opportunity to say, we don't like this rule. It's just going to be random and it's going to be recurring. We're going to start that at the next meeting, and I don't even know which chapters are going to be, but so you'll see up for comments. We're just going to ask for comments from the public, basically, y'all read through this entire chapter, and if there's anything you don't like, let us know, and we'll take a look at it. So it's a process to make that more transparent. And with that, I'll stop, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. I want to welcome the new commissioners, and look forward to working with you guys. And I'll be glad. That's the end of my report.
Any comments, questions? I have a comment about the CWD and the check stations. It wouldn't happen without Animal Health Commission staff. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think Texas Parks and Wildlife has a veterinarian on staff, do they?
Not that I'm aware of. They may be
Samples, this was done by our folks, and I think there needs to be some improvements made, especially on some of the facilities, and some of the locations that need to be, we need to have personnel at those locations, but there's not a whole lot out there. And if the weather gets bad, it's pretty brutal out in those areas. But firsthand knowledge, our group did a great job. And one thing that really stood out to me was you've got parks. You know, when you have Parks and Wildlife presence at any check station, they've got their vehicles. And a couple of times I went through that check station at Carnutus, and some of our staff were working out of their own pickups. You know, it makes I just think it makes our presence more presentable if we have at these areas, maybe our trailer, maybe those particular staff, those particular inspectors with maybe a vehicle that.
We're going to have a structured after-action evaluation of all the things we did, and that's obviously one of the things in there. We know right now we're going to have to set up a check station in El Paso next year. We didn't have one. Texas Parks and Wildlife said they didn't have the staff to do it, so that's going to probably be run by Animal Health Commission folks.
Okay.
Our challenge is, do I have the infrastructure to support a process in far west Texas with still an understaffed group? And we've got some significant, Andy's going to talk to you about some significant tuberculosis traces going underway, and the South Texas issues on a number of pyroplasmosis things. We're stretched so thin right now, but that's no excuse. Next year we're going to get better equipment, better visibility, better oversight. With Dr. Lansford here now, we finally got a boss of the field folks. There was nobody, it was just me and those guys on the 7 regions just doing whatever they could, the best they could. So we're going to have a little better support in this office to make sure they have what they need. And so it's a point taken, and we will improve that and continue to strengthen our partnership with Texas Parks and Wildlife as well. Train those folks to help us. And their zone's bigger than our zone by far. And so one of the reasons we didn't tackle what they did is we knew we couldn't do it. I mean, it's just, you can only do so much, and so we focused on that smaller area, but we want to do it right where we're at. We want to do it right. So we're listening.
Ernie, I have an additional comment. I went by there in Van Horn, I guess it was the last day, or the day after the last day. Our personnel were there, Parks and Wildlife personnel were there, and there was a little bit of a controversy in pulling these stems from the standpoint that one Parks and Wildlife person did not want to pull the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, which meant compromising the cape for somebody that may want to have it mounted. So possibly next year, maybe we can get Parks and Wildlife and ourselves to make an announcement that if you do want to, you kill a deer in this zone and you want to mount the animal, you may want to cape it out before you take it by to have the brain stem. The Parks and Wildlife person may say, why do they pull the lymph nodes? Well, that's a USDA deal.
It's a backup to the chronic wasting disease
Right.
test, and we also can use it for tuberculosis surveillance as well.
Yes,
And we
well,
actually
that's
are
exactly what I
with
told
El
them.
Paso Dairy
Yeah.
study. So
And they didn't know what to tell people. And then I told them, I said, this is a USDA rule, and they're doing TB surveillance, but they can also actually test those lymph nodes for
and we believe
CWD as well.
with a little better training, you can get the lymph nodes out without sacrificing the cape. It just wasn't necessarily worth the argument at the time, and so you know, some of this dialogue with Texas Parks and Wildlife, we're just gonna have to talk, because they're not the boss, we weren't the boss, we were out there together.
Yeah.
And there were some disagreements, and we decided not to get into it.
It wasn't a big
Next,
conflict.
but that came up a lot. That
Yeah, it
wasn't just
did.
where you were at. And so we're gonna sit down with those folks, and if there's a message we need to get to the hunters, that this is the preferential way to bring your animal in so that we don't mess up your cage, we wanna do that. But I wanna try and get those those lymph nodes to us are important. And so if we can figure out a way to make everyone happy, we wanna do that.
Overall, they worked real good together, and they
Right.
had a lot of samples, but they had a lot of questions for me to
Absolutely.
answer, you know, there at the end of it, and that was one of them.
Yeah. And I've said this before, we work closer with Texas Parks and Wildlife than any other agencies. We have a great relationship. Carter Smith and I talk regularly, and we can work through this. It's just kind of been one of those ad hoc things that's emerged over the last couple of years. It's going to take us a while to really get better prepared for it as an agency, as agencies together, and refine our relationships on the ground. And we will do that. You will see a better process next year when you go out there.
Any other questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the actions of the executive director for the period from September the 11th, 2013 through January the 14th, 2014.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the executive director from the period of September 11th, 2013 through January 14th, 2014. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to do a little shuffling on the agenda. We're going to move item 9 up to now to give Dr. Hughes Garza. I would love for her to give the presentation on the lab. She's got a call. She's got to be on at 10 o'clock, so you have the floor. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. I really appreciate Chairman Morales offering to move me up on the agenda a little bit. I was asked to talk to some other state animal health folks about the National Veterinary Stockpile exercise that we had in October. There's a lot of other states that I think are interested in what we did with that exercise, which I believe Jeff Turner will talk a little bit more about when he does his emergency management report. So happy to be here this morning to talk with you about our laboratory. Seems to be the trend lately. We've got more changes going on at the lab. It seems like it's been that way for the last couple of years. There's always changes, but my first item is that since our last meeting, we received our audit report from the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. In September, we had 2 auditors come down from Ames, Iowa, from the National Veterinary Services Lab to audit our quality management system. The NALM membership is a really big deal for our lab, something we're very proud of, and we've only been a member of that network for a couple of years, so this was the first audit that we went through after we were admitted into that network. So lots of preparation and making sure that everything was ready for that. We were pleased with the outcome of it. We got several commendations, particularly on some of the improvements that we've made since our initial audit. As probably with any audit, they had some recommendations for us to improve on, but we're still in the network. I'm very happy about that. That primarily allows us to do our pseudorabies testing. We're required to be part of that network to do the pseudorabies testing that we do. And so we're in the process right now of writing up all of our improvements and the changes that we've made so we can respond to that audit by the end of this month. So I mentioned at our last commission meeting that the building that houses our laboratory, we've been in the same building here in East Austin for about 20 plus years. That building was recently sold, and that coincidentally with the end of our lease term, and the people that bought the building want to use the building for their own purposes, so we're getting ready to move. We have worked with the Texas Facilities Commission to find a new location for our lab. It's about 3 miles from this office, right near the intersection of I-35 and 183. So it's pretty easy access from some major highways, and it'll be convenient from our office here. So we're happy with that space. It's about a 9,000 square foot space with offices and then the lab space, and then we have a pretty good sized warehouse because we use our lab warehouse to supply a lot of our field activities as well as the lab. So we're preparing for that. When the time comes, we'll be getting information out to everybody about changes in shipping samples and things like that. One nice thing is that we're going to be really close to the main post office here in Austin that we've already been using for our old lab, so we'll be able to keep our same P.O. box, and will be obviously a different physical address, but hopefully we'll have minimal effect on people shipping samples to us. But our target move-in date there is April 1st. So I believe that Larissa Schmidt will be talking with you a little bit more in her finance report about some of the financing that comes along with this move. So one of the other changes that we've implemented recently is we've started sending out monthly statements to all of our veterinarians that summarizes what what lab fees they've accrued in that month. For the new commissioners especially, our lab didn't really charge fees for any of our services until 2012, and so we've kind of been still working through the process of implementing the fees and how we collect that. And I've actually gotten some really positive feedback from several veterinarians about the changes, so hopefully that's a good thing. Dr. Ellis mentioned with the federal government shutdown in October, we had a pretty slow month in October as far as sample volume. We were already expecting that the brucellosis volume was going to decrease because of the changes that USDA was making in their slaughter program, but in addition to that, then we didn't get any slaughter samples during the shutdown. Gave us an opportunity to work on some other things, and with the membership that I mentioned, there's always internal audits and things that you have to do, so we were able to put some of our employees to work doing that sort of thing. So right now we're back up to being pretty busy, particularly with tuberculosis testing and then our swine sampling. We've had pretty high volumes of swine samples recently. So wanted to mention a couple of special projects that our lab has assisted with recently. We were contacted by USDA and the Wyoming State Vet. They were interested in running about 400 samples on our tuberculosis gamma interferon test. We were able to help them with that. And TAHC, in partnership with USDA, was doing a small study in South Texas on feral swine and whether they could be a reservoir for cattle brucellosis. And so we received samples from some feral swine for that project. Did culture and serology. So that concludes my report on our lab, unless there are any questions.
Is this new location going to be bigger?
It's a little bit bigger, yeah. We actually asked for something approximately the same size with a little bit different configuration. When the Facilities Commission came in and measured everything, from the time we moved into that lab till now, there's different requirements based on the number of employees, and you have to have so much space in the hallways and that sort of thing, so it ended up being a little bit bigger. So
We have a Facilities Commission in this state.
we do. And I'll tell you that they in this particular case, they were really helpful because we have such a small staff. I'm sure Larissa could attest to this. We don't have a lot of people that do our contracting and leasing, and they provided us with a lot of help and expertise in trying to negotiate something reasonable and find us a good spot. So.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move back to item 4. Dr. Schwartz will give a presentation of animal health programs epidemiology. Good morning, Dr. Schwartz.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Before I get into my report, I did want to introduce one of the new personnel that we were able to add. Laura Brady is with us this morning. So she's my assistant, and I've been 3 years without an assistant, so I think I know I'm happy. So she's already made me more productive, so I'm pleased that we're able to do that. So in this report, I go through some specifics of cases, and I think it brings, adds a little more flesh to the bone of what Dr. Ellis laid out to you, that we are diverse and we have a lot going on. And I don't want to get down into the weeds too far and take too much of your time, but if you have questions about specific cases, please feel free to ask me or talk to me after the report. So starting off by species with cattle, tuberculosis, new cases. Since the commissioners, since you met last September, we've had 4 new cases. 3 of those were feeder animals of Mexico origin, so they were wearing Mexico tags. We're able to trace those back, although Dr. Ellis mentioned there's some difficulty in trying to trace those sorts whenever they cross the border. We don't always know where all the cohorts went, so it's difficult sometimes. The 4th case was a domestic cow. It was a cow sold, consigned from a producer in Van Zant County. So just after the meeting in September, this cow was found in October. This cow had a back tag and an ear tag recorded at slaughter, so we're able to go back to the market records, find who consigned that animal. It turns out it was that herd, that pasture had been dispersed. There were a small number of cattle on that pasture, and they were sold out. But we tested all the other units that individual had under ownership. 12 other units, about 700 head of cattle, and did not find TB. But he indicated that he had purchased this cow about a year before, and so we're still tracing back to try to find that source. This cow was wearing a cat foot vaccination tag that was put in 1998, and we're able to find that through records. So she was an old cow, and we're able to go to that herd of origin and tested it last week, and it was negative. So apparently she was exposed to tuberculosis sometime after she left that herd in southeast Texas. Following up on previous cases that I've talked to you about last summer, and actually in June of 2013, there was a cow consigned from an individual in Anderson County. On this case, no identification was recorded at slaughter. So we went to this individual seeking records, and he was not able to produce them. Basically, he buys from multiple sources. He buys knockout animals from multiple feed yards and livestock markets, and we had no way of tracing that animal back to the herd of origin. So we basically had a dead end there. That particular case is in enforcement mode. We're seeking solution through administrative penalty, but it still won't help us find that herd of origin. We did compare the genetic fingerprint of that organism to that one we found, I just told you about in October, because they came from the same part of the state as far as we know, but the 2 did not match, so we used 2 different origin there. The beef herd in Coke County, I've talked to you about that a number of times before. That was detected at slaughter. We traced almost 1,000 animals out of that herd. One of those cows left the herd back in 2009, went to another herd in Texas for 2 years, and then went to North Dakota. When we caught up with her in North Dakota, she had TB. So we went back to the place in Texas near Fredericksburg where the cow lived for 2 years, and we're tracing all of those cows that got exposed, because that's essentially another affected herd. That operation turns over their population every few years. There was 105 animals we're tracing out of that herd as exposed to TB. Of particular interest, there are nine black pairs that were sold by that individual. They all had back tags and ear tags on them when they were sold by that individual, but they went to one ranch, but that ranch dispersed their cattle during the drought in 2012. So those 9 cows went with 400 others, or 400 plus others through markets, and the tags were not recorded when they came back through the market. So that trace has expanded considerably there. But we're working on as best we can. We're using descriptions of the animals. We're using brand records as much as we can, but we'll undoubtedly have to test a number of cows, because we can't find those 9 exposed animals that we're looking for. Moving on to the next page of my report, Dr. Ellis has mentioned to you the El Paso TB risk assessment. As a result of House Bill 1081, we were asked to do an assessment of allowing dairies back into that prohibited zone. I don't have a map in my report, but there is a map in your folder under tab 8 in one of the press releases there. It's got a map of that the zone that I'm talking about now, if you'd like to look at that. It looks like this, the existing El Paso dairy prohibition zone, if you'd like to look at that. So as part of this process, we have to look at the history of what happened in the El Paso Milk Shed. So from 1985 to year 2000, we tested 11 to 12 affected dairies over and over again. We're not able to eliminate TB, so those dairies were bought out with federal funds to the tune of $57 million. So those 10 dairies were bought out. The last one left in 2006, and now there's some desire locally to have dairies back in that area because it stimulates the economy. There's a source for a market for alfalfa and other feed that's produced there. So what we're trying to do, as Dr. Ellis said, is to make a transparent effort of assessing the risk of allowing those dairies back into the area. So we went out last fall, met with the representatives who authored the bill. We were out, had the crew of 19 people, as Dr. Ellis said, out last week locating animals for the TB testing. We found livestock that we could potentially test on 200 premises, about 4,000 head of livestock. About 1,900 of those are cattle. So, some are dairy cattle just outside the zone that we want to test down toward just past Fort Hancock. So there's no dairy cattle in that zone, but just outside we want to test those. And then we're going to test all beef cattle in the zone. And then we'll make a decision on how many goats and sheep and other species to test. There's about 1,000 goats in that area, about 900 sheep in that movement restriction zone that we found, and then handfuls of cervids and other exotics there. So we located the animals. We did the mapping last week. We'll go out in February and begin testing, try to do an intense effort and get as much of that knocked out in February as we can, but be done before the heat of the summer. We'll take that information and then roll it into our report, our assessment. As Dr. Ellis mentioned, we also took the opportunity to do TB surveillance in the hunter-harvested mule deer in that area, in the Trans-Pecos area. It's not exactly in the area we're looking at for high risk, for TB risk assessment, but it's some of those deer could be from that area. So we're looking at those samples. We've tested 25 of those animals out of that surveillance zone and not found TB. And we're also cooperating with or collaborating with Wildlife Services, USDA Wildlife Services, and when they get their positions filled in that area, when they trap coyotes or take feral swine in that area, we'll test those for TB as well. So in the end, the goal is to reconsider the current prohibition of dairy cattle in parts of El Paso and Hudspeth County. So we'll make a recommendation for no change to the zone, or reducing the size of the zone, or eliminating the zone and allowing the dairies back in.
Andy, who makes that final determination? Isn't that a federal rule?
Well, the movement restriction zone is the Animal Health Commission's designation. We are declaring it a high risk, and so the Texas Department of State Health Services issues dairy permits, and they're not allowed, by legislation, they're not allowed to issue a permit if we say it's high risk. So now what you may be talking about is on those specific properties that were depopulated. There was I've forgotten the exact legal term, but there was a 20-year restriction on having any breeding operation back on those specific properties. So,
Okay, gotcha.
so it's sort of a combination, but ultimately, I'll, as project lead, I will write the report. Dr. Ellis will review it, change it, and present it, and we'll present it to you, commissioners, and we'll see what we come up with then, depending on that recommendation, and you'll have it'll be a decision, your decision, if you make any changes ultimately, is my understanding. Is that accurate, Dr. Ellis?
I think so. I mean, I think there's not a right or wrong answer. It's going to be just a judgment call, and obviously we'll work with Commissioner Baumann, probably our dairy stakeholders as well, just take a look at it, make sure that we're all on the same page, and if there's a need to modify the zone, which could very well be the case, that would come back as a rule proposal for y'all to consider next fall. And obviously if we find TB, we're probably not going to do anything easier. So.
How many cows did you say there was to test?
1,900, about 1,900. That includes the 3 dairy type operations just outside the zone.
And beef cattle, that's all cattle?
Yes.
Okay.
There's one large producer there, with several hundred head, and then the rest are smaller animals. So the majority, about 1,200 of those are dairy cattle. We think about 300 are in 300 of the beef cattle are in one operation, and then we've got some other smaller operations. So thank you. Moving on to brucellosis. As you've heard earlier, the surveillance testing at federally inspected slaughter plants is now down to the 2 markets. Dr. Ellis mentioned, since your last meeting, we've had 15 investigations of animals that were not negative. Fortunately, we've not diagnosed any bovine brucellosis, but when we have reactor titers, that's part of our procedures to follow up and do the herd investigation, the testing, to make sure there's not brucellosis there. Sometimes these titered animals, these titers or reactor level titer test results are due to Brucella suis, where that particular strain of Brucella crosses over from feral swine to domestic cattle, but there's no way to distinguish it on the blood test. So we've got to do an investigation to make sure there's not Brucella abortus there. On the trichomoniasis effort, the control program, this past year there were almost 22,000 bulls tested. 480 of those were positive, giving us a test prevalence of 2.2%, which is exactly what I reported to you in September. It's down a little bit from what I reported to you in May of 2.9%. So as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we'll have a working group meeting before the next commission meeting probably, and we'll look at any changes, and we'll have more precise numbers at that working group meeting. Switching species to swine, swine brucellosis, we've since your last meeting, we've conducted or are conducting 5 investigations of animals with positive titers at slaughter. One of those operations is a large herd where there is a continuing problem with feral swine jumping into the operation in spite of efforts to keep them out. And that's primarily what's happened with these other herds as well, where there's contact with feral swine. With pseudorabies, we're in the middle of a large investigation at the moment that involved a show pig breeder. He sent a cull sow through the livestock market to slaughter, and she was tested at the livestock market at slaughter and was positive both places. We tested the herd of origin, got 2 additional positive animals, and so we made the tough decision at this time of the year with all the livestock shows going on, but we decided we needed to do it, and that was pursue the sale of the 104 pigs that were sold by this producer. So we're after those as quickly as we can, working with private veterinarians and ag teachers and all the others and the individuals that bought these pigs. And so of the 104 that were sold that we're tracing to be tested, 17 have died or gone to slaughter. Of the 87 remaining animals, we've tested 73 of them, and they've all been negative so far. So we're just about to finish up that effort. Switching again to equine species, Plasmosis, as you've heard before, we did a high-risk testing in Kleberg County that concluded last fall. Of the almost 1,000 animals that were tested, we found 19 positive animals, giving us 1.93% prevalence. The year before, in 2012, we tested all the equine in Kennedy County, and that was at 182 horses, primarily horses, and found 17 positives there, so 9.3% prevalence. So, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we want to do some additional testing in counties nearby, and so in consultation with Region 5 management and our EPI staff, it looks like we will be testing in Brooks County next, beginning in April. So we'll go down and test all those horses that are not part of that index ranch, and beginning in April, and try to wrap that up as quickly as we can. So, and we're essentially trying to make sure that we don't expect to find a lot of pyroplasmosis there, but find the edge of where there likely is pyro. So, I think that it's mainly along the coastal area where there's a higher population of the cayenne ticks that can actually spread the disease from horse to horse.
Can I ask you a question, Andy?
Sure, sir.
On those positives, what was the final disposition on those? Were they treated, or were they disposed of? What happened?
They're all over the board. There's one pasture with basically an absentee landowner, multiple positives, and those horses are still standing there. I mean, we haven't been able to.
You just
locate
can't
them.
move them.
Right, they're under quarantine, you can't move them, and that's okay. I mean, it's legal to do that as long as they're not exposing any other horses, but we prefer that they either be treated or euthanized. But the horses where the owner has elected to treat them, there's a high success rate. We believe that all of them are cured, you know, they're basically, but they're clear of the organism, but it takes years for the antibody levels to go down below detectable levels. But on that index ranch, over half, all the horses now that were positive, that they still have been treated and retested, and that we had no new positives, and more of those treated horses are going negative. Over half of them have gone negative now.
Now, with this new regulation, those horses are gonna have to be microchipped, right?
They already are.
Oh, they already are.
Index horses they're all microchipped. But any reactors standing around anywhere in the state that haven't been microchipped, they're gonna have to be.
They're gonna be microchipped, okay.
Just wanted to briefly mention an equine herpes virus 1 incident we had back in November. You'll see a lot of these in November. November was a really busy month for us. So in mid-November, that we had positive PCR results from a horse that was at a veterinary clinic in Johnson County. The horse had neurologic signs and was positive on buffy coat and nasal swabs for EHV1. We have developed an EHV1 response plan that we put into place and are ready to use should we have an outbreak at an event. We had a chance to practice using this at a relatively small situation. We put the 6 other horses in that barn at the vet clinic under quarantine, and the 7 horses that had gone back home already, we traced those and put those under restriction and did daily monitoring of those animals for 28 days. And we had no other horses break, no other signs, and so that quarantine's been lifted. So that had a good outcome, other than that original horse had to be put down. Going to the poultry front, we had some activity in November as well. We had positive test results for laryngotracheitis in a show chicken flock. The owner collected the samples herself. She was a registered nurse. The chicken had shown signs and died, and she submitted samples positive for LT. We went out and tested the flock and then retested it 30 days later and got negative results. So evidently it didn't spread, as far as we could tell, to the remainder of the flock, and that flock's been released. We had positive test results for avian influenza. We were doing some pre-market testing of a live bird market supplier of ducks in the same region, in Region 2. It was positive for avian influenza. The samples were sent to NBSL, and it came back an H3, which is a low pathogenic. It's not an H5 or H7 that we worry about, an epidemic or high path avian influenza outbreak. So it was a low path virus, commonly isolated from wild waterfowl, and that flock is under hold order pending depopulation. Moving on to cervids and exotics, chronic wasting disease. In October, we gained full recognition by USDA as an approved state for our herd certification program. So that it was a year-long effort of changing our rules, changing our program to meet that federal rule for interstate movement of susceptible cervids, and we were glad to finally get that done. It took a lot of work from our former commissioner to make that happen and get those rules changed, and we were glad that our producers in Texas are able to sell their animals out of state if they choose to do so. Not mentioned in this report are the program standards that USDA put forth at the same time as the federal rule. There was a lot of controversy over those standards, and they've been pulled down and revised and are now out for public comment again until March 31st. So there's a chance for input on those program standards that essentially flesh out what the federal rule does. Dr. Ellis mentioned the sampling of the deer in the Trans-Pecos area, the collaborative effort with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Last year, as you recall, we found chronic wasting disease in mule deer in the Waco Mountains. It's right in El Paso and Hudspeth County, right on that county line, close to the border with New Mexico. So during this hunting season, the total of 268 samples have been collected. We've gotten test results on 254 of those 268, and all of those test results have been not detected or negative. So we've not found any positives this year. There's been a fairly low amount of surveillance, and only 5 animals from the 2 ranches where the positives were found last year. We've only been able to test 5 samples, but all of those have been negative so far. As Dr. Ellis said, we'll revise and review that effort so that we correct some of the shortcomings that we had this year, and as Chairman has directed us, and so we'll.
Well, I didn't think there was I thought, I was trying to make the point that without our staff, a lot of this wouldn't have
Well
happened.
taken. That's right. I mean, that's exactly right. We want to, get them in, good conditions out there. And
Right.
There's some differences right now between our high-risk zone and containment zone and the Parks and Wildlife high-risk zone and containment zone. So we'll try to work through that so it's not confusing to hunters and landowners. So to conclude my report, I'll touch on the animal disease traceability activities. We continue to distribute the bright metal ear tags that Veterinary Services provides, and we're passing those on to owners free of charge, and some tagging pliers. We've got representation I believe in every county of the state now, distributors. So we're given out over 500,000 tags so far. From the regulation standpoint, at the September meeting, you approved the tagging facility rule, and today the cattle identification rule is up for adoption. The approved tagging facilities, as Dr. Ellis said, we instructed all of our regions to visit with livestock markets in their area this month, and give them a chance to voluntarily become tagging facilities. It's not a requirement, but it's in their best interest, we believe, because that way they can receive out-of-state cattle, or cattle sold at their market and sent out of state can move without, and be properly identified. We expect that most markets will want to sign up to be approved tagging facilities. The last item is the electronic certificates of veterinary inspection. We're trying to move into the digital age as much as possible and do away with these piles of papers that we have to process. We developed an agreement with a second commercial provider of electronic certificate of veterinary inspection, and this provider, like the first one, will actually issue the electronic certificate of veterinary inspection and collect the $7 that by our rule is required, and remit that or send that to us periodically. So they'll collect the money for us and send us the data electronically. So we see it as a win-win situation when a veterinarian chooses to use an electronic CVI. And we're also continuing work on developing our own in-house electronic CVI, and we're on about an 8-month expected completion date. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my report.
Any questions for Dr. Schwartz? Thank you, Andy. Yeah, go ahead.
Andy, when will, you think we'll have the results of the TB testing on those deer out west?
So far, I mean, we started that effort in the middle of the sampling process, so we didn't get to look at TB for all of them. So the 25 that we've done have all been negative. So
They have been negative.
have been negative. So from here forward, it'll be just the managed land deer permit animals. Between now and the end of January, I think there'll be some more animals taken, and we should get surveillance on those as well. So maybe another, 100 animals total. It's a question of how many of those we'll get to test. As was discussed, those lymph nodes are not always collected if the hunter wants to have that animal as a trophy, so as a mount. So, but we got to have those retropharyngeal lymph nodes to look for TB. We just do a gross exam for any lesions. If we found anything, we would do further diagnostic testing. But to answer your question, there've only been 25 of them tested so far, and they've all been negative. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, Dr. Varner. Dr. Varner, welcome and good morning.
Morales, how you doing this morning?
Great.
Appreciate it. Commissioners, I do have a handout. I apologize for arriving late. I live 9 miles away. It took me an hour and 20 minutes to go 9 miles.
You were on Mopac, right?
It was, man.
I saw that.
I mean, I should have.
I dodged like that once.
I apologize. You'll also find that I did, on this little handout I did, it's operator error, but I put the stuff in the copier wrong, and so it's, the staple's like on the bottom, right? You're going, what the hell, why is the staple on the bottom? Well, what I'll do first, I guess, for those who don't know me, my name's Kevin Varner. I was the area veterinarian in charge for USDA for Texas. We've done a reorganization that we're working our way through. It's going to be a year or so. Now I'm what's called the District 4 Director. That includes Texas is the prime state, but also Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So, but that's, well, no, actually, no. So let's just, we'll go through this first report. Now, Dee talked a little bit about the tick program, and I'm going to touch on kind of some of the same things, but maybe a little bit different angle. The first page is basically shows that what I've been telling you guys for a number of years now, the trend lines all look good. We're really happy, Dee and I, at the trend lines with what's happening in that program. Look at the number of infested premises. The number is going down, plus you'll see later we're pushing the location, the ones we find closer to the river, and that was our goal. But I want to remind everybody that there are risk factors out there that remain. There's no Mexican tick program on the Mexican side of the border, okay? That's gone. They did that for a number of years, but with the unrest, the problems in North Mexico, nothing happens on the Mexican side of the border with regards to ticks. We're still seeing, again, really high levels of deer throughout that whole region, especially Zapata County and at the heart of that zone. Deer can carry this disease. They move freely, frankly, across that border. And finally, we're also seeing a trend for a number of reasons, but we're seeing fewer and fewer Texas cattle in South Texas, and we're going to do something. We're doing some things to try to reverse that. But this program works best when it almost seems paradoxical, but this program works best when there are more cattle there, because we can treat cattle, we can work with cattle owners. Deer are a problem. So but the trend lines are good. Let's accept that the trend lines are good. The next page just shows that the infestations, the main infestations that we have still are remaining in Starr and Zapata County, which was the epicenter of that 2006 outbreak. Next page just shows graphically where those are. The red stars are in the permanent quarantine zone. The green stars are on the free side. And again, I think what's happened is we've been able to push the ones that we find closer to the border. Most of the free infestations in Zapata County are right across the road. Okay, there's one little gap that we have trouble with deer moving up through this gap, and we have 2 or 3 premises on the other side of the road, but they're right up against the road. Next page just shows a graphical number of infestations, and I think the thing to note here is that while our trend lines are good, we're also flattening out. We're in that 25 to 30 infested pastures a year mode that we've seen that really is like if you look between outbreak, the 70s outbreak and the 90s outbreak, 2006 outbreak, that's about where we were, about that 20, 25, 30 herds pastures a year. So we're there. And when I'll mention vaccine, what we hope to do with vaccine in part is push that lower. That's the way we can break that and push that even lower. Finally, this last page, I just look at this little graph right here, and you'll see that from year to year to year, we continue to push it down. December of 10, we had 90 infested premises. 11, it was 57. 2012 was 32. This year, we're at 26. So again, trend lines are good.
Kevin, would you not disagree, though, that we shouldn't get our expectations up for this to go much lower? With the rainfall, which means more grass and more bushes, the ticks don't die, and this is probably about as low as it's going to get. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, except that, the vaccine, I think, is really something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the vaccine is really the game changer right now. And I'll just, I'll touch on the vaccine and following with that. we finished pen trials. I mean, this company stepped forward. This company's building a vaccine just for us. Now, they're going to make lots of money. I mean, their viewpoint is that this is a stepping stone for a vaccine that's really going to be effective against Boophilus, the species of the tropical tick that's throughout Brazil, where Brazil spends $2 billion. Brazil livestock producers spend $2 billion a year fighting Boophilus ticks. $2 billion a year. So this company's going after that market, but along the way, they're going to help us. And frankly, if they come up with a Boophilus vaccine that's even more effective than what they're going to give us or provide for us, we're going to be way ahead. So we've gone through the pen trials. Dee and I have been, it's been a frustrating experience. We were set. We're ready to do a safety study in the field. We've got a producer in the permanent quarantine zone that said, come on down, let's vaccinate my cattle. So we're ready for that. We were originally projecting December of 13. We're sorting through the details, but basically we're looking at the first quarter of this calendar year. The company we're ready for the company basically to give us the vaccine. They give us the vaccine. There's just a couple little things that we have to do on the USDA side, but basically the vaccine comes and we're going to put it in cattle. It's a 90-day safety study in the field. We'll send the results to CVB, and so we should be, just within hopefully within, we're aiming for just a matter of months. We're going to be able to use that vaccine throughout the permanent quarantine zone. And what's it going to do for us? It's going to be a proactive way of putting a barrier up, where we're going to prevent a lot of infestations, and infestations that we find are going to be easier to treat. And what we're going to do at the end result, I hope, is to encourage livestock producers to put cattle back in the zone. One of the problems down there we've got is it's a pain. You're in the permanent quarantine zone. We have to scratch. That won't stop. But just being infested, being quarantined, it's a problem. But if we can, especially in the annulatus area, north of Columbia Bridge out to Del Rio, this vaccine's 100% effective against annulatus. So we shouldn't see, in most cases, infestation. So we're really hopeful. And what I always like about vaccine is producers understand vaccines. They like vaccines. We're going to work with producers to minimize our impact. We're going to work with them. We're working their cattle. We'll vaccinate, and we'll do this every year.
Kevin, there's gonna be more cattle going in?
Yeah.
Because a lot of that country's really turning around.
That's right.
Are you gonna vaccinate those cattle going in?
Yeah, the idea is going to be, what we get into here's the goal. Long term, the goal will be once a year, we go in, we either put new ID in, we read the ID that's in the animals, we scratch the herd, and we vaccinate. We booster once a year. We're going to have to just live, I think, with those cattle moving in and out at other times a year. We're just, program-wise, I think we're going to, unless a guy calls us up, we'll have vaccine available, and we'll coordinate at times, with the producer that says, yeah, I'm happy with the vaccine, I'm buying some cattle, can you guys vaccinate them? We'll do that. But in general, we'll gear up to vaccinate once a year. Once we got through the initial two vaccination front end, we'll do it annually.
But vaccinating once a year is an incentive, but I guess the biggest incentive to repopulate that area would be less scratching and surveillance. How's that going to work?
Okay, well, see, that's right. Right. What we don't buy, what we don't change is the reality that in order to leave the permanent quarantine zone, we've got to scratch those animals and dip them. Okay, so that doesn't change.
Sure, but that's not a problem.
Right.
I'm talking about when they're in the quarantine zone.
See, when they're in the quarantine zone, that's the beauty of this. From my standpoint, is especially this vaccine that this company's producing for us, it's 100% effective right now against annulatus. It's about 65, 70%, mid 60% effective against microplus, that tropical tick. But through the years, we go through these annual vaccination cycles. We're going to see fewer and fewer outbreaks even in the microplus end. But the annulatus end, in a vaccinated herd, we're going to see very few infestations. I mean, that's the idea. Now, the problem we have, again, is we don't have a solid barrier of cattle, right? I mean, we've got cattle here, but then lots of just, you know, fallow land, vacant land with lots of deer on it, and that's a problem. One of the things that ARS, the Agricultural Research Services, who's our partner, Texas Animal Health Commission is our partner, they're actually looking at a vaccine now, to take this vaccine technology and find out a way to get it into deer, which would be another advance down the road, really a breakthrough for us.
Dr. Gordon,
Yes.
as long as the deer move freely across the border, are we gonna ever solve the problem of ticks?
We never will. I mean, we have to live with that. But, you know, here's the thing about deer. They're not as effective a host because they've got a smaller body size and they groom a lot more than cattle do. And so they're not as effective a host. They won't carry as many adult ticks in the end. But yeah, no, we're gonna live with this, okay? There's no way we're gonna stop it. But we put up a barrier of cattle that are resistant, and they're gonna kill ticks for us 24 hours a day. And so those infestations that are gonna come across, they're not gonna be able to gain a foothold, so to speak, because that's the idea, you know? And even the infestations that we find, those animals that are vaccinated respond to treatment a lot better than than regular cattle. I mean, you know, we're actually attacking ticks like from about 3 different angles with different technologies that actually go after different parts of the tick life cycle, so that it's hard for them to get really resistant, you know, to what we're doing, so to speak. So
Are these percentages,
Go ahead.
are these percentages after one inoculation or a series of
after the
inoculations?
2 inoculations.
2 inoculations.
Yeah, it's what we see in the pen trials is 100% effective against annulatus, and about 65% against microplus. Now, but what we find in the field, like if you look in Cuba with Gavic vaccine, they only were 30% effective against microplus in our pen trials. But they said in the field, you keep using this stuff year after year, and you'll see tremendous decreases in the amount of ticks.
My point was what I said originally in regard to your question. We'll still see infestations of incursions. They'll just be easier to clean up, and they're less likely to spread ticks or ticky cattle outside the zone, so they'll be simpler. So it'll be easily resolved within vaccinated herd is the point here.
Yeah, and that's one of the risks, you know, since we don't have anything going on with the Mexico tick program, that it complicates our risk, because that border area is full of ticks. And so any of those animals are coming across, and they potentially expose us.
Have you vaccinated any Babesia positive cattle on the other side? Would it kill ticks on them?
No, I do not know. Well, it will kill the ticks, because here's the thing, because it's actually unrelated to the infection of Texas cattle fever. The tick vaccine is different than, like, most producers think of a vaccine, you know, it works actually different. What it does is it attacks the gut of the tick. So the tick feeds, and it basically attacks the gut lining of the tick, and the tick just dies. It won't produce, you know, it dies slowly. But so it's not like an antibiotic, like you're not, it's a different mode of attack than a normal vaccine. So, yeah.
There's a lot of these Mexican steers are Babesia positive.
Oh, yeah.
But
you vaccinated,
They don't have a
you,
tick on them, they're not gonna cause a problem, but.
Right. We import a million plus Mexican feeder animals. Lots of those animals are Babesia positive. We just don't have a competent vector, you know, so that's what our job is, right? So.
One last question, as far as this vaccine, are you gonna get enough up front? Because I've already talking to some of my clients that are ready to go back into that quarantine zone with some cattle. You know, they've been vacated for a long time, and, you know.
Wasn't it 50,000? They're gonna produce 50,000 doses projected for a year.
I don't anticipate, I think 20,000 again.
20,000?
Because I don't anticipate any problems.
Yeah,
I think we can.
Well, I'm recommending to them that they vaccinate these cattle before they go back into the tick zone.
That's perfect.
Well, your rule that if you pass that rule today, they're gonna be required to do that.
Yeah.
They're gonna
that's
have
good.
to be vaccinated
Yeah.
when there's a vaccine available. It's not available yet. So
We don't, we don't anticipate numbers problems or vaccine availability problems. I mean, this company, we still haven't quite worked out the price, but at one point they were telling us, we'll just give it to you. I mean, for them, it's I don't know how long the production run, but we talked 20,000 doses in one of their plants. It's like, I don't know, like before break, the guy's done, right? Yeah, I got your vaccine, so.
You're just kinda in a holding pattern right now, waiting for this stuff
We
to get
think by
here.
next fall,
Yeah.
that's all, I mean, it's not in our control.
Right, the company, again, it's just the company needs to deliver the product, we're ready to go, and I think they're actually surprised how fast we're moving. I mean, this vaccine is going to be approved just for regulatory use, meaning just for USDA and Texas Animal Health Commission people, which makes it a lot easier on our end, right, to approve something like that, because it's not gonna be in a feed store, it's not gonna be, we're gonna have control about how we utilize that product. The biggest problem we're gonna have is it's gonna come out, in order for us to have that, no withholds, a slaughter, no problems, we have a 60-day withhold. And so when we work with the producers, if they're gonna have cattle to sell, we won't vaccinate those animals. Okay? We'll identify the animals that are gonna stay in the permanent quarantine zone, the rest of them will go. Just touch on mandatory ID for us. There are lots of advantages in that permanent quarantine zone. One is we're going to get better surveillance. Right now, we just scratch animals that are leaving the zone, unless we know there's ticks there in that particular pasture. This is going to allow us to scratch the whole herd once a year, and that's the first thing. It's going to improve surveillance. The second thing is we're going to work, and Dee already emphasized this, but we're going to work with producers. We don't want we get in people's lives enough as it is, and so we're going to work with them to, when you're working your cattle, that's when it'll come out. We don't want to be gathering twice. We're going to work, and we've got flexibility at this. It isn't like we've got to be done next week, or it's not an imminent disease risk, or we've got to lock you down, and But so we'll work with producers. We're actually, I'm directing our guys to schedule, get the first working group called together this week. Our goal is March 1st to be ready to go. I'm going to dedicate on the federal side, a core group of people, of three people that are just going to be full-time doing this until it's done, working through the issues. It's Texas Animal Health Commission and USDA staff together on the working group. I'll just wrap up. I'm running long. I'll wrap up with just an issue that came up actually in the last few months, and it concerns Mexican strays, the issue on the border. A producer in South Texas said, I think USDA took some, found some of my cattle. They were my cattle. They weren't strays, and USDA sold them. And so there was an investigation done, and I think I always look at positive things on things like this. Let's figure out what went wrong. First of all, our goal is not to sell. Our goal is not to sell U.S. cattle, okay, and confiscate. Take U.S. cattle and U.S. cattle owners. Our authority on the border is lined out in the Animal Health Protection Act that was signed in 2002. Secretary is made responsible for that. As part of that, we got guys basically on the border from Brownsville all the way out to El Paso, especially intensely, obviously, in the tick zone, but we've got other folks farther out. On those stray Mexican cattle, when we have U.S. cattle that gets mixed with Mexican or exposed to Mexican animals, we take actions, okay? And this investigation pointed out to me that we've been doing this since 1938, and we've got solid on-the-ground knowledge. We've got good people out there working, but it was time for review to what we were doing. I think we can do better. And this, as a result of this investigation, simple things like we didn't have a written protocol, frankly. I don't know. It's hard to spin that any other, like a good way, like but we didn't have a written protocol. In our new protocol, we're going to be doing things like taking electronic images of the animals we capture, their ID, those kind of things. So we've got a record so that if somebody comes up later and says, hey man, we can actually address it up front versus, because our goal certainly is not, our goal is to protect American agriculture. you know, it's nothing else than that, so. Any questions? I'm gonna work with TSCRA, and I'm gonna go through our written protocol and look for just their input too, to make sure that, I wanna get us all on the same page on this issue. Any questions? Thank
Any
you.
questions? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I'm sorry.
No, anybody? Thank
I might just mention that it's our agency's goal to enhance their river riding capability. We're in the process of hiring at least one inspector in far west Texas, and certain days of the week, that person is gonna go horseback with his riders, and we're gonna use our horse team that we created last year. There's at least 3 or 4 herds of Mexican cattle in Texas that we know of right now, and we're gonna use our horse team in conjunction with his riders to go catch those animals, and we're gonna be working with local law enforcement officials, and TSCRA we may need, and New Mexico Livestock Board, we're gonna work with them as well on brand inspections and some other issues related to these animals, these Mexican animals living in Texas. They're a threat, a disease threat, so we're gonna strengthen our partnership, and be more involved in this same topic that Kevin was just talking to you all about, so we'll have a better presence there.
And that's one thing I'll emphasize. You know, we talked about no tick program on the Mexican side of the border. All throughout northern Mexico, that Texas-Mexico border, we see loose cattle, frankly. You know, last year, USDA and Texas Animal Health Commission we gathered, ended up 96 head of cattle out in far west Texas. And they were Mexican animals. Nobody claimed them. 96 head of cattle. Nobody called up. Nobody claimed these animals. 96 head of cattle. I mean, that's throughout. We find it all the time. Guys, you know, Texas landowners call us up and say, "Listen, can you do something about these cattle? You know, they're all over my property." So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've got a lot of clients that ranch along the river. Even have one that in Jim Hogg County that has a ranch out in Brewster County, and they don't ever see their neighbors anymore. He got a lot of country just north of Big Bend Park, and there's a lot of Mexican origin cattle just come on his property all the time. I mean,
This is what we're talking about, not
Yeah.
where the tick zone is. This is north of
No,
Del Rio to El
further up.
Paso. He has 2 employees for the entire range from Del Rio to El Paso. And
they haven't seen their neighbors in 2 or 3 years. Normally they'd see somebody, you know,
we're gonna
cross
get
the
more
river.
involved. We've asked
Yeah, they've been
USDA
run
to do
off.
a risk assessment of this.
And the cattle are just like the deer, you know.
They are, and you know, the most likely problem is that those people are selling calves off those. They're not selling the Mexican adults, but they're selling unbranded.
That's
calves.
probably happening, you know.
So we're going to continue to work. I want us to strengthen our ability to assist USDA with the interdiction of these animals when possible.
Okay. We'll move on to item 6. The subcommittee met this morning at 8 o'clock, and Commissioner Simmons will give us a report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've covered Region 5 office, which is in Beeville, probably one of the busiest regions, I guess, that we've got. And there was 5 things really that came up out of this, improving if you'll turn to section 3, page 3 and 4, it pretty well summarizes everything that went on. You know, strengthening and by improving our fixed asset accountability, monitoring of permits, data entry, and monthly reconciliation of petty cash transactions. And you can see, I guess, according to Dr. Ellis, at this time we were through a sort of a transitional period. We were low on staff. No one was there to really run the operation. I guess where there's going to be replaced here pretty quick. And so if you look at the summary of the management response on that page 3 and 4, you can see that these things are taken seriously. In the time I've been here, this is the most that we've had on any audit. But these are fixable things. If you take the trailers, we bought the trailers, and there was a transitional period between people doing the purchasing, and they just didn't buy the locks for the trailers. So that's being taken care of. There's a lot of correspondence between the USDA and the Animal Health Commission, and they loan equipment out and back and forth, and there's a sprayer that's come up missing. I think Dr. Ellis said you'll be trying to find it. It should be found. So there's some things, the petty cash, as you can read, steps have been taken to assure that. One of the big things was changing over input data, change computer systems that states mandated that we do, and that's not an easy deal for people in business. You know very well how hard it can be to, and there's still training to be done here. I think it's even in the office, isn't it, Dr. Ellis?
The audit finding was that the supervisor of the data entry people weren't checking occasionally to make sure they're really putting the data in they're supposed to. But our managers don't know how to do that yet because it's and it's actually a new federal system, not a state system. But it's going to take us a while to, I mean, it's just, that was the audit finding. It was a correct finding, but we're in a transition on databases, so.
Well, as you can see, the response is, this agency is always taking care of business, and I appreciate Mr. Mundy and Robert for their input. This is the kind of things we need for internal audits, and that's what it's all about. But this agency, when there is a recommendation, always steps up and takes care of it. And everybody's to be commended in our office and staff. So with that, Chairman, that's our audit.
That's your audit. Do we have any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the audit subcommittee report as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We approve the audit subcommittee report as discussed today. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. As far as we had Randy, who is not on the commission anymore, was a member of this committee. I have asked Mr. Leathers, Commissioner Leathers, if he would like to take his place, and he has accepted, so I will appoint Joe Leathers as the third member of the subcommittee. That doesn't need a vote, does it, Gene? Okay, great. And Bonnie, I guess we're ready for you for the presentation of communication and public relations initiatives. Good morning.
I do have a motion there. I apologize.
You do? Do I have a motion then for item 7?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the appointment of Joe Leathers as an audit subcommittee member as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We approve the appointment of Joe Leathers as an audit subcommittee member. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I apologize, Bonnie. Now the floor is yours.
Esteemed Chairman and Commissioners, good morning, and welcome to the new commissioners as well. And Commissioner, we're going to miss for sure.
Thank you.
Today, I'd like to share with you some of the agency's communication outreach initiatives. First off, I'd like to bring you up to speed on some of the recent hot-off-the-press news releases. As you've heard from Dr. Ellis's, Dr. Schwartz's, Dr. Garner's presentations, there's a lot that's been going on. So that means lots of news information to share. So Lisa and I have diligently been working on getting several news releases disseminated to the public. Those are found in your commission book, and they are also available online. Several more are in the works as we speak. So just as an FYI, be looking in your inbox. You'll be bombarded with several from us in the next couple of days and weeks. And then just as an FYI for new commissioners, any news releases that come out of our office will always be emailed to you all. So if for some reason you all miss them, get with myself or Amanda so we can make sure that there's not anything wrong with our or you all's email settings in receiving our emails. And then stakeholders will always receive those news releases and always posted on social media and on our website. Secondly, just to briefly highlight some of our exhibit participation, as you are aware, having a presence at our industry-related conferences that plays an integral part of our communications plan. Since the last commission meeting, we've participated in several exhibits statewide. Some of them, Southwest Veterinarian Symposium in San Antonio, which our Region 5 staff manned. Then later in September, we had Region 3 personnel attending the Johnson County Emergency Management Preparation Fair. In October, Region 7 personnel were at the Washington County Cow-Calf Clinic. And then here just recently, Region 4 management participated in 4 states cattle conference in Texarkana. And then in the next couple of months, before the next commission meeting, we'll have several exhibits ranging from emergency management to local ICA events, and then regional stock shows as well. So you can look forward to hearing about those in the next commission meeting. Moving on to our Farm Bureau News and Views initiatives, and as a refresher for new commissioners, what that is, it's basically a real brief 5-minute segment that Tom Nicoletti of the Farm Bureau hosts. It's basically an in-depth view of agriculture reviews statewide. The TAHC did partner with him, and we do monthly interviews with them on a wide range of topics. Most recently, Dr. Ellis participated in an interview with him after last commission meeting, talked about the rules that were adopted and that were up, but then he mainly highlighted the brucellosis rule. Amanda Bernhard partook in an emergency management interview talking about protecting your livestock during the winter months. And we'll have a few of those monthly, of course, to talk about in the coming commission meetings. Those are available. I don't email those out, but if you are interested in what those are, let me know. I'd be happy to send you an email with the direct links, or they can be found on our website. In closing, I'd like to end with highlighting our social media campaign. Well, last time I talked, I was talking about the chatter is social buzz. Well, the buzz continues to grow. No surprise there. And to convey to you the power of social media, not to persuade you to get into it, but just to convey what the power is. Last time we were here, 3 months ago, approximately, we had about 100 less Facebook followers and about 40 less Twitter followers. That might not seem much, but it is in the realm of social media. And basically what that means is that social media is powerful. It's dynamic. It has a dynamic impact. It's fast and it's instant. And that's why Lisa and I continue to engage with the audience, providing current, informational, educational information to this demographics, and just doing the best we can to showcase TAHC at its finest in whatever we're doing, day-to-day activities, TB assessments, attending conferences, exhibits, so forth. And again, not here to sell you on social media, but if you don't have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, I'm happy to show you how to keep up with us and be in the know even though you don't have one of those channels, and I can help you with that offline. Some of the interactions of our Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn interactions can be found also in your commission book. So, I'm happy to entertain any questions, gentlemen. If there are none, Chairman, Commissioners, that completes
Good work
my
as
report.
usual. Good job.
Thank you for your time and your attention.
Are y'all ready?
Yeah, let's go ahead, let me get
Are you here? Good, you okay?
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Same to you.
I'll call this meeting to order. If I can, could I have an approval of the September 10th meeting minutes?
Yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes of the September 10th meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Carried. All right. Mr. Rufus, if you will,
Is there icing on those rolls? I thought you were gonna, you told me you were gonna.
It's in the cup, you have to add it.
Oh, you
however
have
much
to.
you want.
Interesting concept.
I should have done a couple of them for you, sorry.
No, I just thought we had a brown one.
CPA firm of Wayne and Rufus PC. The firm is internal auditor for the Texas Animal Health Commission. I'd like to introduce my longtime associate, Robert Gonzalez, CPA. The first report we are presenting this morning is internal audit of Region 5 office, Beeville, Texas, and that was as of October 23rd, 2013. And the first page of the report is where we indicated that we evaluated the Region 5 office with respect to reliability and integrity of information, compliance with rules, policies, procedures, regulations, and efficiency and effectiveness of operating procedures as of October 23rd, 2013. We go to page 5 of the report. That lists our objectives and the findings. We had the primary objectives of the internal audit were reliability and integrity of information, compliance with policies, procedures, laws, and regulations, safeguarding of assets, and efficiency and effectiveness. Within the audit objective 1, we had a finding there. Obviously, before talking about the finding, the office has some good controls in place. We just noted that there was some opportunities for improving the system that they have in place. First finding there is a brucellosis test information that was not found in the Surveillance Cooperative Service database. The SES is used to enter information about the brucellosis test record, and we did notice that one of them for one county, that information was not entered into the system at that time. So what we're recommending is that the Region 5 Office Management continue to conduct quality control data entry monitoring by the supervising inspector on the current schedule and ensure that brucellosis test records are being entered into the SES system in a timely manner. That is the key. That information is presented to the commission, and you use that information for something. So it should be entered in a timely manner. So we'll go to page 6, where we have the strengthened controls over the e-permit. We selected a sample of e-permits, and we noted that some of them were not verified on time, ranging from 36 days to 165 days. Again, it should be verified in a timely manner. And one of the reasons why we thought that it was not verified in a timely manner was the fact that there was actually no policy in place to make sure that the e-permits were verified in a timely manner. So what we're also recommending is to have a policy in place so that at least you can be able to hold somebody accountable. On page 7, we have finding number 3. It says on March 7, 2013, the petty cash log recorded a deposit for the amount of $200.25 and being made to the bank. But the bank statement shows the deposit as being $299.25 on the 8th of March 2013. And there was also a deposit of $99 made to the bank on July 5th, 2013, which had not been posted onto the petty cash log as of October 3rd, when we were there, 2013. So a good internal control ensures that information is recorded, and there's also a timely reconciliation. When you reconcile, it helps you to identify any errors or any irregularities that may exist. So we are making recommendation that the region office, even though the central office is also reconciling at the end of the month, the region office should also be reconciling their petty cash with the bank statement, just to make sure that all the information there is accurate.
Mr. Mundy, how much money do they usually keep in this account?
It's a maximum of $500 with petty cash, according to the commission policy. Yeah. All right. The next one, at the bottom of page 7, is to strengthen controls over fixed assets. During the testing of fixed assets, we noted the following. There are 2 trailers parked at the Region 5 office on first premise and did not have a hitch locks to secure them from being moved by unauthorized parties. One trailer was a corral system portable trailer, gooseneck trailer, costing about $13,000. And the other one is a custom livestock trailer, metal top, costing about $11,800. Basically, we saw those 2 items. Nothing was there to protect them. The B part was a spray rig that was a part of our testing of fixed asset inventory. costing about $3,939. That could not be located at the Region 5 office. The management was telling us that the spray rig location was in Eagle Pass, Texas, but we could not identify that fixed asset. Okay. And there was also a squid chute that we found at the location. We didn't see the inventory number there during our testing of a fixed asset. So our recommendation is that management should take precautions to ensure that all fixed asset property items assigned to Region 5 office are properly tagged and reasonably secured in order to protect the agency's property. The agency should also follow the State Comptroller's Office State Property Accounting Process Users Guide to report any missing fixed asset property during the year-end fiscal inventory process or when noticed missing. That's all I have, and I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have related to the internal audit of Region 5 office.
Will that sprayer just be a write-off if they can't?
They'll just follow the Comptroller's Office guide and dispose it of.
The problem is the USDA guys have it and they lost it. I mean, we've got to tighten up our internal processes for a transfer between Animal Health Commission and USDA, but we work side by side every day, and at some point they just said, hey, we need to use this. There wasn't any paperwork done, and now they don't know where it's at. I think we're going to find it, actually, but it's probably Monday. Probably this is a statewide. There's probably some more just like this that where, and we've talked. I've talked to you about this before about someone needs to audit USDA, but you can't do that because they're federal and we're state. But we use each other's equipment. We've got some of their equipment, to be quite honest. They probably don't know where it's at. So it's an ongoing problem. It's not big. It's not lost. It's in our system, but we're going to have to tighten down our paperwork for transfer. And as you can imagine, a cowboy says, can I borrow your spray rig? They don't whip out a piece of paper and fill out the form. They don't like to do that. So it's a challenge that we're going to continue to work on internally to tighten our controls, and the audits well served. I mean, point taken. So.
All right,
Mr.
go ahead.
You got any questions or?
No.
Anything else? Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that, do we need to go ahead and move that we approve the audit report? Is that check for all?
Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Fine. Motion passed. Okay. All right, this was
We can go home?
no. This year's, it's almost your turn.
I do have a question. How often does that stuff happen? If y'all ever considered GPS, which has gotten to be pretty expensive, but I know a lot of real companies use it. A lot of companies use it.
Not very often. Well, I'm not going to make any excuses, but I'll just tell y'all the situation with this region. No one in the management of this region was there the last time they were audited, and their boss is vacant. That's and our purchaser quit. We bought this horse trailer, and they should have bought the locks to go on the horse trailers, and they did. This is a combination of weak infrastructure till we can rebuild our agency's managerial oversight. So the answer is it doesn't happen very often. This is one region gets audited every year. This is the worst audit we've seen, and I don't like what I saw here, and we're going to fix it. But it's a reflection of a number of factors that have all come together last fall. And truthfully, had we sat down with these guys before the audit, we already knew they were going to ask these questions. We always know they're going to look at petty cash, and they're going to look at equipment, and we should have done better on this audit had there been any structured communication between executive management and the regional management as to what to expect in the audit, and we should be ongoing. This should be an ongoing thing. The computer data, we don't have a process for that. That's a new computer system that the feds put on us, and our managers don't know how to do the audit that you're writing up that we should be doing. That's a whole nother problem that we're not going to be able to do that right now, which is have our management at the field level audit the admin techs on a system that they don't know how to do. And so, you know, how do I pull in field staff to learn a computer system for audit reasons? It's not at the top of our list. We're gonna have to work on that, but there's a number of factors here that have made this what I would consider to be not a good review. I don't like what I saw here, but the problem is we could have fixed all of these had we had the assistant state vet over the animal health programs in place, and that office has been vacant for a year and a half. So there was no, Dr. Lansford, as the regional director, had no one to sit down with him prior to this and go, here's what they're gonna come look at. So not that we're gaming you guys in any way, but we should have had a better audit because we already knew what you're gonna ask. And so it's just it's an indication of what has been a slow erosion of our systems and processes due to lack of people. We're on the mend. I'll talk to you all about that in a meeting in a minute. We're on the mend as far as tightening up our gap, deficient personnel shortages and our managerial oversight. It doesn't happen very often. There's nothing illegal or anything going on here where there's criminal activity or it's been stolen. We just didn't keep up with it well, and that is our busiest region. The Beeville office is overwhelmed with work right now. They have pages of work to do. I sent y'all some of that, and you saw that. And so I don't like this. We're gonna fix it, but these are little tweaks that should not be hard to fix. And whatever the next region is that comes along, you're not gonna see these same things, because now that we have someone in place in the assistant state vet office, they can work with the field to make sure that these things are not repeated. We're gonna have to create an e-permit verification process. We just filled that spot about 4 months ago, and ADT has overwhelmed the guy that would do that up until about now. And on the SCS, the computer thing, I don't know how we're gonna fix it. We don't have, our entire agency is still trying to learn how to do that. Even the people who do it every day are learning. So to expect a supervising inspector in Beeville, who's the boss of our inspectors, to learn a computer database system and go in there and audit our admin techs, it's gonna take a while. So we're gonna work on this, and these are easy fixes. We just bought the trailers that didn't have the locks. They were just bought the month before. Our purchaser quit. Fran retired. She should have ordered the goddamn locks with the trailer. She didn't do that. Y'all immediately caught it in the first month, and so, you know, it's those kinds of things. So I'm not making excuses. We're gonna do better on this, but to answer your original question, Eric, it's not very common that we have deficiency. Usually this is the most deficiencies noted in one of these audits that I can remember in 7 or 8 years. And most of our regions have now been audited at least twice by you guys, but the people that were audited in Beeville the last time are no longer here. Dr. Leonarduzzi and George Kalman, and they're all gone, and there's no boss over that region, so there was no one to help TR understand that when they come, here's the things that you're supposed to be looking at. And it's not for the compliance with the audit, it's just good business principles in general. And they didn't have but one admin tech. We just hired another admin tech last year, so they've just been short-staffed. And there's a combination of factors, but I'll tell y'all, this will be better. We're gonna fix this at the agency level, not just the Beeville level, so.
It's usually better if they get a bad audit, because they'll look for it.
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know that this is really a
That's
bad
really
audit, but there should have been nothing found, because none of this was new. That's what, when I looked at it, I was like, well, we already knew they're gonna come look at our petty cash. Well, I wasn't involved. You know, when you hire someone, say, you know, how many people manage their checkbook every month? Well, none anymore. If you're under 30, I guess, you don't balance it. That's a whole nother issue. So anyway, but I do want to, well, my kids have both told me, Dad, why do you still do that? So anyway, but Eric, we're gonna fix this, and thank you, Monday, for pointing these out, and there's nothing, I don't think there's anything illegal or criminal here. It's just stuff starts, this is why we have audits, is to remind us to stay on top of these things. So we'll take these and we'll fix these problems agency-wide, not just in Beeville, so.
I would like to make a comment. One of the reasons we did emphasize the trailers and all, because we observed that, and one of the things that's happening in Beeville in that region, there is so much oil boom going on. And anywhere we went, you could see the big trucks that tow a trailer anywhere, you know, just back up into the premise and just take it. So that was what we wanted to bring it to the attention of management, that you need to put locks and everything. And usually when we go to a region, you won't see that. But for some reason in that area, Gonzales, Beeville counties, it's just booming like crazy. So that's one of the, and like Dr. Ellis was saying, you know, it is a little different than most of the reviews we do. Especially the transition personnel also.
Any other questions? All right, Ms. Mundy.
Okay.
All right.
I have,
They just voted on it.
Yes.
okay, all right. The next one here is the fiscal year 2013 internal audit annual report. This report here is required by Texas Internal Auditing Act, Government Code 2102. This report is usually due November 1st each year, and it used to be a summary of all the audits completed within the previous fiscal year. But this year, the report changed. There's House Bill 16. If you go to page 2 of that report, it's House Bill 16 that now requires the state agencies to publish reports released by the internal auditor on their website. You have to, that is within 30 days after approval of the report, it's now supposed to go to the website of the state agency. And that is beginning fiscal year 2014. So the website should have now the fiscal year 2014 audit plan, the fiscal year 2013 annual internal audit report. It will also include all the summaries of weaknesses and deficiencies, basically all the reports issued by the internal auditor. It should include the fiscal year 2013 audit plan. If there were any consulting services done in fiscal year 2013, that information will be there. External quality assurance review. Just the key there is reports issued by the internal auditor are not required to be on the agency's website, including the audit plan for the fiscal year. That's basically what changed. It didn't used to be a requirement, but beginning fiscal year 2014, it became a requirement. Now I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions?
And by the way, I want to mention that we had already submitted this to the State Auditor's Office, the LBB, Sunset Commission, and Governor's Office because it was due November 1st, and that was pending the approval of the Texas Animal Health Commission.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the annual audit report for the FY 2013 as discussed.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. Mr. Mundy, I thank you for your work, you and Robert. Like I said, like Dr. Ellis said, that when I read this the first time, you know, I had to read it again to appreciate what was going on with the trailer, the sprayer, and the petty cash. But you know, if anybody, a lot of us been in business, we know that if you don't have the right training and a lot of things going on, and you don't have people there, that things can slip through the cracks pretty quick. And so I thank Dr. Ellis and this, knowing his staff for the last 13 years, I think they'll take care of this quickly. So anyway, I appreciate everything that you do. And so I think, is there any public comment? I didn't see anything. If not,
no cards. No cards for public
okay.
comment.
So if I hear a motion to adjourn, we will adjourn.
I so move.
All right. So adjourn. Thank you.
Always look forward to your stuff coming through.
Yes, we do. We will move on to Mr. Jeff Turner with a presentation on emergency management.
Morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
appreciate the opportunity to visit with y'all this morning on things emergency management's been doing since y'all's September meeting. Just a few things we'll hit on. We've been pretty busy doing a lot of things. As y'all can see, there's a little bit of change here. Amanda's over there now, and wish her a lot of luck what she's doing, and look forward to seeing that little boy she's carrying. One of the big things we've been working on for the past few months is something called mission-ready packages. It's a development of the way our agency can respond whenever we're needed to go out and do some different things. It's kind of a federal initiative, a little bit of how states can come together and be able to go out and do things. We put a lot of effort into this, designing and developing how we can actually do things. We've always had the capability, or some level of capability here with the agency to respond. The mission-ready packages actually put these things together so our inspectors as well as our partners in local jurisdictions know what we can send to them. We can track our equipment, our people easier. It also means that we'll be able to possibly recoup some funds if we respond to some large disasters. And I think that's pretty important all the way across the board. THC's taking the lead on this. We're one of the first state agencies to get out there and do that, and for sure one of the first agriculture groups to be doing this. So I'm really proud of all the work that's gone into that. Next thing we're continuing on is our local planning. We've been working with a lot of jurisdictions across the state in how we can assist them in response in their planning initiatives and things, how we can go out there and take care of them, and they can actually take care of themselves better. Jurisdictions across the state, they have a lot of information, they have a lot of things to be able to respond whenever something happens in their jurisdiction that's animal related. And what we do is go out there, Dr. Culp and I, we talk to them, she talks to them intensively about the small animal piece, and I visit with them on the large animal piece and make sure that we just work with them to see if they're going to be able to respond to something. All the incidents that occur across the state, they're going to affect large and small animals both, and to be able to have a good plan in place really helps those local jurisdictions. Next thing is our RRAP program, our Regional Resiliency Assistance Program. It's been going on for a couple of years. Some of the new commissioners may not have heard of that, so I just want to touch base on it a little bit. That program is going to be wrapping up probably about mid-spring to early summer. It's a program that's been going on to develop some resiliency to a foreign animal disease outbreak. The main portion of this planning effort has been in the Panhandle because of the intense feedlots up there and everything, how we'd be able to respond to that. A lot of the different things that have come out of that is a template hopefully we'll be able to use across the state with other folks in planning efforts on how they can respond to different things, the local jurisdiction. Whenever a FMD happens, or foot and mouth disease, that's one of the main planning parts of this. How will that local jurisdiction tie in with the state and federal response? And then across the board, how we'll be able to take care of some of the issues that come up, the C&D, carcass disposal, and also we're talking about possibly vaccination to slaughter. With that, it kind of rolls into our next little deal, that's something that Dr. Hughes Garza spoke of earlier, was the exercise that was held back in in October 30th of the National Veterinary Stockpile exercise. Had a very successful exercise. It was held in San Antonio. That exercise, we brought in the feds, the state, and some local folks, some partnering agencies here with the state, DPS, TDM, Department of State Health Services, on how we'd be able to respond if there were an outbreak, foreign animal disease outbreak. How can we get some of the vaccines in and be able to respond if necessary, to repackage those and get them out to the points of distribution. It's a very effective exercise and it worked quite well. I think we're going to have a lot of lessons learned, how we can better be able to respond in the future with that. We're going to be talking about that. Dr. Hughes Garza left actually talked to the SODRA group. We had a statewide multi-state conference call this morning on that topic, and we're also going to be going down there next week to discuss this further in a conference down there. Some other points we'll be discussing there is going to be our response, our agency response to the West incident that happened up there whenever they had the explosion. We had a lot of things we did. We went in and took care of a lot of the larger animals, some small animals. We'll be doing a presentation with that on how we responded as an agency, hopefully to assist some of the other states that'll be there on their responses whenever they go out and do different things. Another part that goes back, kind of to tie in that mission-ready packages, that first part we talked about, we're going to share that with those folks down there. It's real important because we're going to talk about what we have, what we developed, those packages that we have, how we can assist other states. During the big hurricane response, that's one of our large fears because it's going to affect a lot of people across throughout the state, a large area. What we have, we could respond to help them, but also encourage them, other states, to develop similar packages or similar response resources that we may be able to tap if something happens in Texas and we need some assistance. So, been pretty busy, and I think we've got a lot of things going on in the spring. Right now, we're looking at a lot of threats that are going on. You are probably well aware. We've got a little bit of grass growing in some areas, high fire danger, so we're kind of ramping up for some of those responses, and then always looking to the spring, hopefully get a little rains, but not too much and cause a lot of flooding. So, y'all have any questions of me?
I do. You note that you've reached out, or y'all have worked with 13 different counties.
Yes, sir.
How many counties are in Texas?
254.
254. Do all of them have does each county seat have an emergency management coordinator?
Each county has an emergency management director.
Director.
The director is the county judge by state law.
Okay.
The county judge can appoint an emergency management coordinator if they so choose to, which most of the larger jurisdictions, most jurisdictions across the state do, and it's up to them how they want to do that. Since September, we've reached out to about 13 different jurisdictions and counties across the state. We've been, throughout the years, Amanda's worked with a lot of counties. With conferences coming up in the spring and summer, we'll be able to reach out and actually talk to more. Our field staff, along with emergency management, we're really doing a lot of efforts to reach out there and re-engage those communities. Got kind of short-staffed, for a couple of years, the cutbacks, so it's kind of difficult to get out there and reach out there and tie in with those folks. We're trying to rebuild staff now to be able to make a difference on that for the animal agriculture piece.
That's kind of why I asked it, now that
Yes, sir.
we may be able to be a little bit better staffed. Is it our job to reach out to them, or do we just throw it out there to each county on a county level? Here's who you call in the event of a situation where we can help?
Well, at the local level, and that's where I came from. My past is I worked with the county for several years. Counties, we encourage them as an agency to develop animal issues committees. And in those animal issues committees, we have one of our inspectors, somebody that's tied to that jurisdiction, to be a member of that committee. In doing so, working just like y'all do around the table, they're able to build good relationships, and whenever those needs arise or those questions, we have field staff right there that can answer what's going on, how we can help, how they can help us if we have to go somewhere else and do different things. It's up to the counties. That's one thing that's not a requirement through emergency management, to have an animal issues committee, but it's highly recommended for each jurisdiction, each county across the state to have that. We visited with some counties out west, went to Baylor County, population of 3,700 people, and they're like, wow, we think we've been doing a lot of these things, we just haven't planned it. So they respond a lot, but now they're trying to actually build a committee to visit and see some of those holes that they've done, may have had in the past.
Okay. No other questions?
All right, thank y'all very
Thank you.
much.
Good job.
Now we'll have Stephen Luna give us administration budget status report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so y'all know, the Animal Health Commission, we're operating off of what's known as the General Appropriations Act, which was passed in the summertime of even number years, even number years. So for fiscal year of 2014, which starts September 1, the agency's been appropriated $8 million. This $8 million is not contingent upon revenue fee, which has been approved by the commission to collect also. We are also, as most of y'all know, we do have federal cooperative funds that we receive from the USDA. Those funds that are available for us to spend as we need, come to roughly $2.17 million for this fiscal year, but it's for the federal fiscal year, which is April 1st through March 31st. So it sort of dissects it there, which is not very convenient. No offense, Dr. Farner. We also estimate for the current budget, if it's needed, for the use of next year's, the next federal cooperative year, roughly $500,000. The way it's going right now, we're not even going to have to touch it. Right now, we're sitting on roughly $100,000 in grants. Most of these are through from the Texas Department of Emergency Management. Capital budget funding, that we are allocated $300,000. That comes out of the $8 million that we've been appropriated in the GAA. $150,000 of that goes towards fleet vehicles, and that has been completely allocated to the purchase of vehicles. And $150,000 of it's been completely allocated for the acquisition of information and technology resources, basically software and hardware that we need to replace because it has a limited lifespan also. The Texas Animal Health Commission does have the authority to roll forward any unexpended funds from 2014 to 2015. Right now for fee revenues, we're roughly, I know we're 33% through the year, as of, January 1, we're at 31.6% on what we estimated, sitting at roughly $228,000. But many of our fees are seasonal. CWD, we don't get those fees until late spring, fowl registration, late spring, early summer, and health certificates it spikes pretty much in January, getting ready for all the shows and what have you. So we're not concerned there. Full-time equivalent employees, this is how the state of Texas recognizes, each and every individual that works for the state. They're called FTEs. We are, like Dr. Ellis said earlier, we are appropriated 161 FTEs for this fiscal year. We started out the year with 123.5. As of today, we're at 137, and we're in the process of filling or have filled and waiting for the folks to come on board, between 7 to 10 more individuals. So the pages provided also, there's the financial statement for the agency, and on the back side of that is the fee revenue, and that's all I have.
Do we have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the administrative budget status report as discussed today. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the administration budget status report as discussed today. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Stephen. And now we'll have Larissa give us the possible action on agency contracts and purchases. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. If you would allow me just a moment, Dr. Ellis said during his report, he was talking about our fleet growing in such a large number to over 50. And Fabian Landon has recently been promoted to the manager of staff services. Fabian, would you stand up? He manages our fleet along with everything else that he has going on, and it's a huge task. So he just recently was promoted, so I wanted to recognize him today.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the contracts, purchases, and leases before you today are reported for your information from $5,000 to $25,000. That's on page 1, 2, and 3 in 12. Those purchases have already been made. Beginning on page 4, for your approval, we are asking permission to make these purchases. I would be happy to entertain any questions about any of them that you have.
Why canine catch pose?
I'm sorry?
Why canine catch pose?
That's a new initiative, Dr. Ellis.
I'll answer that.
Okay.
After the West explosion, we realized that our people were unequipped for all contingencies, and as the only animal responders in the West control zone. We were expected by the law enforcement people to help catch every animal that was in there, and so we've had training, and we're buying catch poles, and they're all really happy to be doing that. But it's a reflection of changing responsibilities. Truthfully, we may just give it to another person that's theirs broke or whatever, but we have actually trained our inspectors to be more able to assist with small animal. We actually had dogs guarding their house and things like that, and they were trying to find out if people were in there in these zones in the west, and we didn't have. All we had was a hog snare, so dog snares work better. So it's just part of our emergency management response capabilities.
Good.
Couldn't rope them, huh?
Yeah, that's hard to rope a dog. Small dogs especially. Big dogs easier.
I don't think that we need for Larissa to have to go through each one of these. If anybody has any particular question about any of these purchases, I think recently we moved from 5,000 to 25,000, so you just gave us that information at the beginning just for our information, but
Just
we
for
don't
your
need to approve
information.
that.
Correct.
Okay.
Starting on page 4, the purchase order we have not yet made that we're requesting your approval today.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that you approve the contracts and purchases requested as discussed today.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the contracts and purchases requested. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gene, it looks like it's yours for...
Well, I can tell you what, it looks like I've got the end of the show, so.
Yes, you do.
I guess with that, and the first thing I start off with is Dr. Ellis has tried to get all the departments to come up and give presentations and stuff on their departments so you knew what was going on. Historically, at one time I had given compliance updates that had kind of dropped off, but he asked that I come up here and provide you one. I'll be honest, did a lot of soul searching as to what you may exactly want or what may be most helpful to you to help give direction to us. At this point, I'm going to kind of walk through historically where we've been, what we've done, as well as I would like to acknowledge our investigator, Richard Wagner, who's recently retired and who I've asked to be here today. In my 15 years, I've had the compliance department. I've had 5 different investigators. I've had 3 different admin assistants, Sally being the most recent, who unfortunately is sick today. Of the 5 investigators, I can tell you the heart and soul, the backbone's been Mr. Richard Wagner, who's here today and has just retired. So we'll focus on that in a sec. But, you know, the focus and goal of compliance is voluntary compliance, to educate. You know, for a lot of folks that find themselves having to adhere to the requirements, you know, a lot of it's educating them to the responsibilities that they have, to the purpose and role of what the rules are for, and trying to gain their compliance. You know, through that, most of my compliance comes through first the field. They send up compliance action request up here for us to act. We get a fair amount of complaints from citizens. Typically, it tends to be change of ownership issues. Used to be at one time horses were the biggest that we got a lot of complaints on, having coggins and stuff, as well as I get referrals from other governmental entities such as Parks and Wildlife and those kind of things. You know, over the years, I'd say 85 to 90% of ours is handled through voluntary compliance, letters of notification, working with the actual producers or the individual at hand. And so we have with that at about 15 to 10%, which are focused on repeat offenders, folks who are not necessarily motivated to necessarily always do the right thing. So with that, there's always a need not only for investigation, but for an ability to handle those kind of things. You know, over the last year, I had 112 investigations. As I said, Richard's been our primary one for a long time. We've also been lucky that Bob Young, who's from the agency, worked his way up, who's taken on the role, and I think his future and legacy will also be great when his time comes to retire. But with that, you know, in our actual statutory authority, we have some criminal penalties. Most of them are Class C misdemeanors, which are like a traffic ticket, so to speak, but they do have a monetary. We file them in court. They're handled locally. They're prosecuted locally. It's up to the court how they choose to handle it based on the evidence that we provide. We found it to be very successful. These are things that the investigators work up and file. We also have some Class Bs. These are ones where they're still handled in JP court, but we actually have to handle either the district attorney or the county attorney file for us, and so it takes working with them to deal with those. And over the years, we have had some felonies. Most all of them are altered government documents, and it's kind of been, you know, getting on a felony dock, it's not an easy thing. That said, with Richard, I think we've had 12 over the years, for which 6 of them have been resolved through that, and 6 that were just hard to get any traction. You know, we also have the administration penalty process. These are for rules, violations that don't have an associated penalty within the statute. So last year I had 4 that y'all handled and addressed. They were for trick violations, people that were moving these animals without getting a test or without frankly being accountable for those requirements. I have one that's now in the process, as Dr. Schwartz kind of alluded to, dealing with the trace. It's a dealer record keeping that I hope should bring to you at the next commission, not only resolve, but hopefully having obtained what we need in that regards. And so, that said, as I noted, Richard has worked for this agency for 36 years. He started truly from the ground up. He's been a field inspector. He was a supervising inspector for many years in our Region 2, which was located in Hallettsville. About 14 years ago, I had 2 investigators I inherited when I got here that both retired. And I needed somebody to be able to perform that duty, and found that the agency was best served by somebody who knew the culture, who knew the history of the agency, who knew the people, and who knew the requirements. And with that, Richard came on board and became our primary investigator. And for many years was the only investigator for the whole state. And he always takes pride with what he calls riding for the brand. The brand being the agency in the state of Texas. He takes it with great pride, and he feels that the most important are those in the field, not only the producers, but our inspectors who are out there asked to do these jobs. And so he took with great heart the importance and value of not only supporting them, but being there when they needed it. He had learned the whole process with no training whatsoever. He learned how to use the court systems to the biggest advantage, was incredibly successful and very well received. He managed to develop fabulous contacts with everybody from the TSCRA brand rangers to the Parks and Wildlife game wardens to all the various sheriff's departments, the county or district attorney investigators that are on cases, as well as to Border Patrol. I mean, there was not anything that he would not ride into and deal with. He handled issues from physical threats to our inspectors, to those individuals who frankly are not motivated by doing the right thing, but are criminally motivated. And so these are the ones where he proved most valuable to us, but frankly, his stature, his professionalness served us extremely well, because for everyone, they recognized not only the need to change their ways, but also too that there was an accountability to be had for it. Over the years, he's been honored for his, in 2007, the state of Texas actually honored him as an unsung hero, as the only investigator for a state agency. They recognized what he was asked to do in a state this big, with frankly industry as large and diverse as the animal agricultural industry. They recognized what he did, and so he was recognized as an unsung hero of the state of Texas in 2007. I think though probably some of the awards and honors that were most important to him that I think recognized what he did for the state was from the actual producers themselves. In 1992, Colorado County recognized him for his outstanding leadership in brucellosis testing. He was also in 1987, he was recognized by the Washington County Beef Committee of the producers for his outstanding effort. And for those that go back to the brucellosis wars, it wasn't not only not a popular war, but to recognize and commend him for how he did it in the class that he did, I think truly did represent probably the greatest honor, because it comes from those that he dealt with, and they recognized what he brought to the table. As I said, his heart and soul was in the field. I can tell you many times we might get a call on Friday afternoon, and I have one in particular where he literally loaded up and had to go to the border to deal with something that weekend, and he was there by that night and had it resolved by the next day. And this type of he was going to get on his horse, so to speak, and ride out there, was not only a true testament to his character, but I'd also like to acknowledge too, and his wife Renee, because like any good man, it's the wife that really does support, and she allowed him to go do at a moment's notice. And frankly, he'd be gone for long periods of time to deal with things. And that type of dedication on his part, but his support of his wife, really did make him very successful for us. I've been his boss, but I can't say really, he's been more of a mentor to me. We've argued many a times, but I think always with the end result being, I think, the best decisions made. I learned a tremendous amount from him. I'm very sad to see him go. So I'd like to honor him. I have a flag here from the state of Texas that flew over Capitol, and I'd like to bring him up and give it to him. Richard. This was flown over the state capitol on December 16, 2013, in appreciation of the 36 years of loyal and dedicated service by Richard Wagner to the state of Texas. Thank you, Richard. I gave a cheesy smile. Yes, please.
Can we suspend the rules for just a minute, Chairman?
Please.
If I can get through this. Whatever I've accomplished, most of it, Gene is just as, anyway, he helped me, or he allowed me to succeed. And it's, he doesn't, he never did. Like I said, we argued about things, but we always came to an agreement. I've worked under 6 executive directors, 5 area regional directors, 2 supervising inspectors, and Gene. And he's the best boss I ever had. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yes. Not sure what I'm going to do. I think with this, we want to move into the rules.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let's move it to item 14, into the proposals.
All right, Commissioners, I come to you today to bring the rule proposals. The first one up is 2 things. The first thing, as Dr. Ellis noted, is to establish an authorized calf ranch, authorized grower facility, and these are for dairy calves that are being they've come from exposed or herds that have been restricted for TB purposes, in order to allow them to create a business continuity plan where we can ensure that the risk not only has been addressed and minimized, but will allow these animals to move through the process and the system so that they can continue to be developed and grow into actual dairy cows, or be used for feedlot or whatever, but it allows the actual operations to continue to operate versus finding themselves now being under a quarantine and facing a lot of differences. I think this was something, as Dr. Ellis noted, that he did for the purposes of trying to ensure that Texas had a way to handle these things. And so I think with it, I know that there was a lot of time and effort to develop these, try to make sure that we got it right, got the vision right. It allows for, it sets up and recognizes the calf ranch for the smaller ones, the grower ranch to grow them on out. Will allow us to then put in place a designated agreement to allow with any kind of testing protocols, handling protocols, biosecurity protocols, along with herd plans and procedures to ensure that the risk is minimized for any kind of exposure to any other animals. Also, I will note as part of this process too, as Dr. Ellis noted, the other thing is, in the TB rule, is to require and ensure that any kind of accredited veterinarian that's issuing test documents or health certificates or any kind of certificate on the animals, that they acknowledge that they're inbranded. Part of it is for our own surveillance purposes. If it's not designated, we're not going to catch it in reviewing the paperwork, and as well as be able to account for it. What are the numbers in this? So I think this is really going to help us, that is the agency, to ensure that we can not only capture this information, but have greater control and surveillance over those, to ensure that if there is a risk or exposure identified with those, that we can quickly get on top of it and identify it. So I don't know if you have any questions, comments. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to it. Commissioner Brown?
I don't have any requests for comment, public comment on the proposal. If there's no discussion amongst the commissioners, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 43. Tuberculosis, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 14A, Chapter 43, tuberculosis. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next chapter I bring you is for Chapter 49. This is for equine. This is actually the pyroplasmosis identification requirement. Dr. Ellis noted, particularly with the ability to treat these animals and stuff, there was a need to ensure that we could get a valid identification on all the animals, as well as to provide alternatives. Historically, we'd provide an alternative for a hoof brand in order to do it, but this also will provide for other associated. You're going to be required to have a microchip, but you also can utilize some of the other ones, including photo identification in association with it. Tattoos, registration tattoos are also acceptable. Also, too, it puts in a time frame to make sure we got it within 10 days so we get these things accomplished. So, have greater control over these actual these animals.
I have a question, Gene. Is there any specific microchip? I mean, is there going to be a standardized microchip that veterinarians will most likely have in their possession, and that's going to?
And I may have to get Andy to actually, it's actually identified in here. There's a specific, the ISO, International Standard, what is that? ISO, International Standard Operating. There's actual, recognized by USDA, there is what they call a recognized microchip. And as I understand it, it's just got to fit these components. It has to be compatible to this standard. Any brand that meets these standards would be acceptable. In other words, any production of tags that actually was ISO, as they say, ISO compliant with 11784 or 11785. These are the two standards that USDA recognizes as being acceptable. And I think it has an ability to be read by universally, which is part of it too. It's something you can universally read, which is one of the things I think historically is different microchips would need different readers.
Well, I mean, a lot of veterinarians have a microchip system that'll do horses and deer and dogs and all of that. And in fact, Border Patrol, a lot of their horses are microchipped with that system. I'd ask him if there was a specific microchip system that's going to be utilized for these.
They need to define, the generally, I don't know what the words would be, define that by rule that it has to be one of the generally accepted. There's 3 companies and one of them got bought out and the others 2. Is it in there?
No, we actually recognize the standard. I think then through our public information that we will go out and acknowledge, here are the ones that we know are compatible and acceptable.
One thing that might end up happening here, we're anticipating, is USDA may eventually come out with some requirements for pyro-positive treated horses that may include an annual retest for a few years to make sure that this is actually working. And this will help us as well make sure it's the right horse without marking it in such a way that there's a stigma to it. So there's more than not only just tracking reactors, it may actually be a requirement that we'll need to ensure that we're actually retesting the right horse later, because we're still waiting on the federal guidelines for this. We know what we think they're going to say, and so this is it's just a way. And we've actually had especially some race horses of foreign nationality ownership that just left, and so this might help us catch those later. But yeah, you're a good point taken on the national standards for microchips, but I think they're pretty well codified. Yeah, this should cover it. So.
You need a motion?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 49 Equine, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code, as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second. Been moved and seconded. We approve item 14B, Chapter 49 Equine. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next chapter I bring to you is chapter 51, which is our entry requirements. And this is also focused on doing two things. The first is to also put the in-brand recording requirement for people that are going to send in their health certificates for animals out of state or their test documents that they put on them the in-brand. Once again, the purpose is so that we can account for those, acknowledge, and know what we have in terms of coming in. So this corresponds to what we were doing internally in chapter 43 on the TB. The other part was, you know, with the new federal ADT requires, they use an owner-shipper statement where we historically used a way bill. So what we're doing is we're removing the way bill reference and now incorporating the new interstate movement standard of owner-shipper statement as being the acceptable documents to be used for certain movements into the state. And so we made, therefore, the changes throughout that to acknowledge and incorporate that change in standard.
You haven't had any, did any of your the neighboring state veterinarians have any problem with any of this? Or have you even, do they even know about it?
They know about it. I didn't get any comments back. I shared our rule proposals with them last week. The owner-shipper statement, actually, there's a number of southern states that are preferring to use that instead of health certificates. And I think they're making a big mistake, and we just told them we're not going to de-emphasize health certificates for the use of an owner-shipper statement, which is much more cumbersome for us to manage the data and assimilate the statistics that may come of it. So the answer is no, they have no problem with it. I have a problem with what they're doing, but they still want us to fax them information from sale barns and do these things where we want to move into the electronic age and use electronic health certificates that seamlessly goes into databases and you don't have to do data entry. And so the answer is no, but this is just for us to comply with the terminology that the federal rules, the federal rule just said we're not calling it a way bill, we're going to call it owner-shipper statement. But it's basically the same thing. It's a piece of paper with the information about those animals that are crossing the state line that are not on a health certificate. It's in lieu of a health certificate. So the answer is they're aware of it, they haven't complained, and we're just being consistent with the other states.
Okay.
So.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 14C, Chapter 51, entry requirements. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next chapter I bring to you for rule proposals are Chapter 54, which is our domestic and exotic fowl registration. This requirement literally is focused on the actual live bird markets where they're selling the birds for slaughter. But it's to put in place a requirement to make sure that they confine their fowl so as not to allow them to fly all over the place. I will tell you, this actually came from a specific market for which I had a compliance problem because they kept getting up in the trees and you couldn't get them out. And so, I told him he needs to get his birds out. And so this rule is being put in to ensure that the requirement's very specific and that. That said, he got his birds out of the tree.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 54 Domestic and Exotic Fowl Registration located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that the notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve item 14D, Chapter 54, Domestic and Exotic Fowl Registration. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That finishes the consideration, and on proposals, we'll move to item 15, which are proposals that we passed last meeting. These are up for adoption. I've had a request for 2 comments. What my policy is we'll have Gene discuss the motion or discuss the adoption, and then I'll ask for input from on item A from Dr. Dominguez from TVMA, and then we have another request when we get down to item D. So that's the way we'll handle it. Go ahead, Gene.
All right, this first rule adoption I bring to you was Chapter 38. It's our trichomoniasis requirements for our test exceptions. And what this was, this came out of the actual trichomoniasis work group that happens, was a recommendation that we actually allow for animals that are bought, breeding bulls that are bought, that for which somebody is not sure what they're going to do with them. So they don't want to get them tested. They may take them home for fertility testing, or they may choose to turn around and resell it depending on the value of it. As such, recognizing, and this was something that came up last year in our enforcement stuff, was to allow a controlled process or system where they could be permitted back home, and then they could be permitted back to a market to be sold. Allows us to, for accountability, to keep control of what's actually out there, as well as to allow for some latitude in terms of this type of activity. And so.
Okay. Dr. Dominguez from, is here representing TVMA. Please give us your comments.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm here as the Bovine Committee Chairman of TVMA, and we oppose this proposal. We feel it opens up too big of a window to lose control of the trichomoniasis program that we've been working so hard for already. It's only 7 days, but it's renewable. It could be another 7 days, and it could go on for an indefinite amount of time, essentially. Plus, given the agency's abilities with staffing and funding and all the other programs that they have, we don't see a reason to open up more work for the agency to do when the legislation is already working fairly well. From our standpoint, we think it's a good idea to go ahead and oppose or decline accepting this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion?
I've got a question. I mean, that seems like it's going to be real hard to keep track of. I mean,
Well, I can, you know,
I cited that. I told you about that scenario last week I was presented with, and
So I'll give you my perspective on it, and Commissioner Locke may want to as well. And obviously, when the TRIC committee met on this, it wasn't a unanimous. You know, we don't really vote. At the end of the day, it's his call as the leader of that committee what we're going to do. Here's my take on this. As a veterinarian, I agree with them. We're opening ourselves up for occasional problems. As executive director of the agency, I would tell you I think we can manage it. I don't think it's going to be a great burden on our inspectors. We're at markets. We have inspectors at markets. We already have a permit process for untested bulls. Now we let them go to feedlots, or we let them go home to be tested. We're going to have to amend the form to add another thing. One part of the form is going to say, I agree to get this bull tested within 30 days. We'll have to put another little piece in there that says, I'm buying this untested bull, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm taking it to this location. They're going to have to give us a physical location. At the end of 7 days, if it doesn't reappear at a market, which our people are at every market, then we'll contact that guy and like verifying a permit and say, what'd you do with that bull? The reality is, if you look at the number of bulls untested that are bought at markets, with a few exceptions, there are a few markets, most sale barns don't handle more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 untested bulls. They're going to slaughter. The slaughter market is strong for bulls. They're bringing $2,500 for a slaughter bull, big slaughter bull. And so there's really not a lot of incentive for a producer to continually trade this bull around, feed it and mess with it. They're going to lose weight, and eventually it's going to lose money. They're going to lose money unless they make a quick decision. So I believe the risk is mitigated by the infrastructure that we have in place at markets. This is what we do as the Animal Health Commission. We're here to help enhance marketability and economic viability of the industry. And there were sale barn owners that asked, small owners especially, said, I don't have but one slaughter buyer, and if I could buy that bull, or I could bid on that bull and I catch it, I can just resell it at my next sale. There's your 7-day rule. Or I can take it to another market and resell it the next day or two, and I'll tell you where I'm going with it. So my take on this is that it's probably a minimal risk based on the number of animals and on our ability to manage this. We're already permitting these bulls. And I would just say, I think it's doable. If it turns out to be a fiasco, we can come back and say, hey, this is out of control. I really don't think that's going to happen in the long run because the trick program has been accepted by the Texas cattle industry, and it is as popular as a regulatory program can be. And I don't think that the cattle industry and the sale barn owners, either one, will tolerate a lot of non-compliance with this rule. So I think it's worth trying. I don't think we're going to lose track of many bulls at all. And at the end of the day, this is a control program, not an eradication program. And so it's minimal risk with probably minimal hassle. But it's going to be important to a few people buying and selling bulls, and it'll help them out. And
What are the consequences going to be if the guy decides, well, he just turns it out?
Well, they violate our rules. In a trick program, it'll be an administrative hearing, and we have the ability to get them in trouble. And we've just not seen a lot of compliance issues, and the ones that we have, Gene just told you, he had 2 or 3 this year, administrative hearings, where we reconciled those through our normal legal process. And just in talking to our regions, and I went around to all the regions but one the last month, and this is one of the things we talked about, with just a couple of exceptions, most of our inspectors are saying it's not going to be a significant issue. Most people are not going to trade these bulls. They already know they're either going to slaughter or they're going to a feedlot. Really, the only place this was going to impact you will be if you want to see if it'll buck. They already had a system. They could game our system now by buying a bull and saying, no, I'm going to test it within 30 days, and if it doesn't buck, they just bring it back the next week. So in effect, there was already a way to do this. It was just kind of around the edges and it was kind of gray, and this is just legitimized and actually make it easier for us to regulate those kind of bulls than the other way. And I don't know, Coleman. I don't disagree with what they're saying, but the truth is, put all things together, and I think it's really it would be a very small risk of anything happening, and if so, if it's not workable, we'll come back and say this didn't work and request y'all reconsider.
I know we've got our inspectors that are going to have to educate these buyers on this situation, and so that they'll.
Well, I mean, I guess, Doc, I'm old enough to remember the responsibilities of inspectors 30 years ago. We were S-branding and permitting hundreds of animals a day at a market. Untested cattle had to go out on a 162 form. S-branded quarantine cattle came in, got held up. The inspector 30 years ago was handling hundreds of permits a day. So here we are with the inspector in 2014, might write 1 or 2 permits a day at a market.
Yeah.
I don't really have a lot of sympathy for them. So my thought is that we can try and make this work. This is what we do. We should be here to represent and balance the health risk with the marketability. And I don't think it's going to be that hard to enforce. If I'm wrong, we'll come back and recommend that we reconsider. Probably go back to the trick working group first. I just don't see a big deal here, to be honest.
I'd like to make a couple of points, which Dee has already made. But the working group recommended this in trying to help market operators, mostly, maximize any profit potential that they had on a bull. And the other point I would like to make is that if this doesn't work, if it's a problem, boy, I guarantee the working group will be right back recommending that we change it. So I don't think we're casting anything in stone that is going to wreck us in the meantime.
Mike, I see 2 things we're doing today that are going to help the producer in that the problem with testing these bulls, they don't know who's going to buy them at the end and what the outcome's going to be. And so all we're doing is waiting until the end of the sale to decide if that bull needs to be tested or not with this rule, or waiting a short period of time. The other way we're using that is that the problem in the heartburn of identifying cattle, and we'll get to that in a minute, but identifying those cattle before the sale, running them through and ear tagging them because they might go to the country as heartburn for a market producer. And what we're doing now is, with the other rule we're going to do today, is at the end of the sale, whoever buys them is going to decide if those cattle need to be tagged or not. The same way they're going to decide if this bull needs to be tested or not. And so I think that we're giving more flexibility and letting the end user decide what happens with that bull or with that cow that needs to be tagged. And I see that as an improvement over what we've been doing. For that reason, I think this rule should be okay.
Any other discussion? Could I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we adopt the amendments to Chapter 38, trichomoniasis, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second it.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 15A, Chapter 38, trichomoniasis. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, the second chapter I bring you for adoption is Chapter 41, which is our fever tick chapter. This was in response to legislation that passed this session, House Bill 1807. Purpose of the legislation was to frankly broaden the authority. The fever tick statute is actually the oldest one we have. It goes back to historically when dipping was the only treatment and cattle were the focus. And so that chapter was written and focused mainly on treatment being handled through dipping as well as for cattle. That said, it has become apparent clearly over the years, you heard from Dr. Varner and stuff, there are more treatment options out there as well as for other animals of concern, particularly with the deer. So what this proposal had done was to broaden the chapter to recognize other forms of animals as susceptible to be treated, as well as to allow us to recognize other treatment or management practices that would help to reduce or eradicate the fever ticks. And so it literally went through and made those amendments and changed all the way through. We didn't get any comments on this. And so I ask your consideration. Do you have any questions?
We have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 41 fever ticks located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 15B, Chapter 41 fever ticks. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next chapter I bring to you is Chapter 47, which has historically been our authorized personnel chapter, which was for brucellosis testing protocols and programs. Once again, as Dr. Ellis indicated during the last legislative session, House Bill 3569 provided us the authority to require folks, including veterinarian, to be authorized to engage in certain kind of protocols for the control and eradication programs. As you can see, it's a very sophisticated chapter. I got to give a lot of, this is Mary Ludiker. She did a fabulous job of literally sitting down and working through and working with various TVMA and other industry folks to try to address not only the issues and concerns, but to make the rules fit the need. We got one comment, which was from TVMA, which was supportive of this rule package. And that the only other thing I can tell you too, just for clarifications, that was put in here to ensure that folks knew, it's actually focused on Category 2 animals, which under USDA Category 2 accreditations for large agricultural animals. So make sure we don't want to get into dogs and cats. So anyway, but if there are any questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the new Chapter 47 authorized personnel located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. Further move that we adopt the repeal of existing Chapter 47 approved personnel.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 15C, Chapter 47, authorized personnel. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item D, we have a request for comment, but you go ahead and present the rule up for adoption, and then I'll ask for the comment.
Okay. This next one is Chapter 50. This is our animal disease traceability chapter. This was on the change of ownership. The identification requirement is noted by Dr. Ellis and stuff too. This is for animals that qualify to be identified, that they have within 7 days of being sold to be identified. There is an exception for going to a state or federally recognized approved slaughter establishment. We did get 15 comments for them. They all generically kind of fell in the same line with the most literate and the best examples by the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance, who I think may be up here to speak on it. They raised two issues consistently through. First one was regarding what they considered to be the cost of identification. They felt like there was a significant cost that was not fully identified or explored by the commission. That said, in response to the comments, and for a number of different programs like Dairy ID, where we've had identification, these are things that the agency takes it's not overall expensive cost. It's part of, as you handle and move your animals, it's something that can be done. It's historically been done in the Dairy ID program for years without any problem. The second comment that they raised too was to recognize and ensure that if you were going to a custom slaughter plant too, that they qualified for the exception. And under the way the state's set up, those plants are actually recognized and authorized through the state and federal, and so they do qualify if you're going to a custom slaughter establishment and stuff too, that they don't need to be ID'd as long as they meet the time frames for which to move those animals in 7 days.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll ask Judith McGarry from Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. I think she's got some comments. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Judith McGarry. I'm the Executive Director of the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance. Many of the commissioners, of course, have heard me speak before, but for the new ones, I'll very briefly just say that FARFA represents generally small producers, often diversified livestock producers who are running many different kinds of animals. I've been involved on the animal ID issue for about 8 years now and sit on the USDA's Secretary's Advisory Committee on Animal Health. Pardon me, the cedar is great fun this year. I am very glad to hear that y'all's interpretation of the rule would include custom slaughterhouses. That does relieve a great deal of our concerns. Would have preferred to have that a little more explicitly in the text of the rule, but having y'all put it is in writing and it does address many of our concerns. I still wanted to touch on the cost issue briefly. It may or may not have changed the outcome on this rule. I don't know because we don't have a cost analysis. What concerns me, particularly because, as Dr. Ellis said multiple times, we can expect additional ADT rules to be coming down the pike in the coming year to 2 years, is the agency's consistent failure to really address what tagging can cost small producers. And when I look, for instance, at the response that was given to our comments, a couple of things that strike me is that one of the responses is that the cost of tagging is minimal when compared with the overall production cost. Well, that's certainly true. What it costs to raise a cow and take it to processing or take it for sale is clearly much greater than the cost of tagging it. But the problem for producers, we're not looking at overall production cost. We're looking at what the tagging cost means for the profit margin. And, the profit margin on these animals is not big. And very small costs can very quickly cut into it. I also am concerned by the idea that chutes and headgates to tag cattle are not necessary. I will issue an open invitation. Anybody who wants to come try to tag my cattle without chutes and headgates is honestly welcome to come to my place. And I'm sure there are other producers of our membership who would be glad to make the same offer. Tagging a cow without the proper equipment is both extremely difficult and an invitation to injury for the producer. And we manage many, small, I run diversified operation. I have 5 head of cattle. It's not worth it to me to invest in chutes for the cattle. We manage what we do with them without chutes, but we couldn't ear tag them. So we would either be faced with taking them someplace to get charged for ear tagging, or, and that really would be the choice. We'd have to take it someplace and get the charge because it makes no sense for us to do chutes. And that is the case for a lot of these, again, very small, diversified producers across the state. So I'd simply say, it's one thing if this agency does an economic impact statement, does the full analysis, and comes to the conclusion that the costs are outweighed by the benefits. That it's important enough to do the tagging that, here are the costs and here are the benefits and here's what we should do. But this repeated failure to address the costs and actually analyze them is very troubling, and I'm concerned what it means not just for this rule, but as we move forward with future ADT rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judith. We have any other discussion?
I have free tags and free tagging flyers. Anybody can come get them.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 50, Animal Disease Traceability, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 15D, Chapter 50, Animal Disease Traceability. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Judith, your point is taken, and we'll keep that under consideration. You're welcome.
The next chapter I bring to you is Chapter 51. This is our entry requirements. Once again, these were proposed at the last meeting. This was the focus of this being on the trichomoniasis program. This would allow for Texas bulls participating in out-of-state bull station trials to return to the farm of origin without a test, provided they're maintained in a controlled environment without any contact with female cattle, with that needing to be indicated on the certificate of veterinary inspection. And we didn't get any comments.
Do I have a motion then?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the requirement, the amendments to Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
I have a second. It's been moved and seconded. We approve item 15E, Chapter 51 entry requirements. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to our final adoption. Gene?
Yes, I bring you the last rule up for adoption. This is for Chapter 57. This is our poultry chapter. Once again, from legislation, this was House Bill 1521 that allowed the agency to be able to pay compensation or require that animals be dealt with that were positive. This is something that historically the agency's always had that for livestock, but never had it for on the fowl side. And so this legislation was put forward to ensure that if, as Dr. Ellis noted, if we do have a disease issue come out there, that we can ensure that the birds are taken care of, as well as that they can be paid for, which is proper and appropriate as private property. We did have one comment from the Texas Poultry Federation, which was in support of this rule, and was frankly very supportive of it during the legislative process. And so, other than that, we had no comments.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the new section of Chapter 57, poultry located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second it.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 15F, Chapter 57 poultry. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Gene will move to item 16.
I have, and I think unfortunately, Chairman Morales may be the only one that goes back this forward, and the ghost of Commissioner Winter's dad is here, because when we were supposed to review our rules every 4 years, all the rules, and his father was very instrumental in making sure that these took place. Basically what it is we just put out rules for comment that allow, just generally speaking, we're not changing the rule or anything, but we want to get input, we want to see. Particularly, I will say too, with Mary on board, our goal is to try to go in and really clean up and fine-tune rules as identified in need and make them more user-friendly. As such, what we bring back to you today is the actual rule review plan that we will put out for comment that follows that 4-year cycle. And we do hope that in some of these to make them work so that as we go out for comment, then we can come back to you later with any kind of rule changes and overall cleanup that we may be looking at aside from the actual comments. So what's before you today is just the rule review plan, which will take you through 2018. And then this is the notice that would go in the register.
Mr. Chairman, I move the proposed rule review plan discussed today. Further move the notice of the rule review plan be published in the Texas Register for a 30-day comment period.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve item 16, Rule Review Plan. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
And then the next and last of these is the first rule to go out for rule review. This is our Chapter 32, which is our hearings and appeals process. So we'll put it out for comment, see if we get any comments on it, come back to you the next one, and then we'll continue to cycle through the others identified on the list for publication and notice.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose for rule review Chapter 32, hearing and appeal procedures as found in sections 32.1, 32.2, 32.5, and 32.6 located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed rule review be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Been moved and seconded. We approve item 17, Chapter 32, hearing and appeal procedures. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. As for item 18, we've already gone through the public comment. I don't have any other requests for public comment. And Gene, I think I can handle,
Got it?
yes, I think I've got it from here. Okay. The legislature did allow a 1% across-the-board pay increase to agencies and their employees. However, it's the job of the commissioners to approve any pay raise for the executive director. This would require a closed session if there's any discussion. It is my belief that there's no need for discussion, and if I don't have any reaction from the other commissioners, then I'm going to skip closed session and go straight to item 20. To item 20, if you'll go to the back and somebody please read that motion, we can proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve an increase of the executive director's salary as discussed today.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 20, the approve increase in the executive director's salary. I wish it was more than this, and we're going to do what we can to try to alleviate this soon, but our hands are tied by the legislature. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. How'd I do, Gene? Good? Okay, the next commission meeting, Dr. Ellis, do you see a kind of a time when, I know we've got NCBA meetings coming up and
It depends. The only consideration for y'all to think about is, do you want to wait till the TRIC working group meets to consider any rules that may come out of that at the next meeting? We can, normally that would be, looks like probably the first week in May. So the question is, I can either move the TRIC working group earlier, or we can have the next meeting after that, so that any rules that the TRIC working group wants to propose for y'all to consider would be included in the agenda. Other than that, it's entirely your discretion. April, May, early June would be, and we can work with you offline on this, or we can talk about it today. If you want to wait, if we want to have the working group meeting in May, the first full week in May is, with my schedule, the best time. And then with some other things that are going on, probably June 10th is the best date. That's assuming you still want to have it on a Tuesday for Commissioner Jordan's convenience with his conflicts. Otherwise, we can move the working group up into April and have it sooner if you want.
How much time do we need between the working group and the meeting if we need to take action?
We need to, there's got to be a week, right? It has to be, the agenda has to be posted a week prior to the meeting, and it'll take us at least a couple of weeks to draft a rule.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 3 or 4 weeks minimum. And we really tried to do this last year, if you remember, and then with the legislative stuff going on, we just flat didn't get the TRIC rules out in June.
And you told us you were going to not be able to.
But this year, there's no legislature in session, so if we get our other rules written a little sooner, then we can jump on this rule, and probably we need 2 or 3 weeks to answer your question.
Rather than making the full commission meeting late and getting into summer activities with everything that goes on, why don't we move the working group meeting up a little bit earlier and have the commission meeting when we want to have it?
I would like to see that happen too. Also, as Dr. Ellis discussed earlier, we're going to be working on this strategic plan. We've got a lot of work to do between now and the summer. I want to probably spend a little more time with our staff and Dr. Ellis on that, and as a liaison between the industry stakeholders in that plan, to be as transparent as we can, especially as we get into our, what we foresee in the future as far as budgeting and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'd hate to wait till June, and why don't you guys work on your date for your working group meeting, and then let's maybe look at in late April, early May commission meeting, and to get that taken care of before the summer. And we will just have, Amanda, you can just, once you know when they get their TRIC meeting set up, then shoot some dates out to us, and we'll work it that way instead of trying to set a date today.
Yes, sir, not a problem.
Okay?
Yeah, we need to check on the language in the law about the TV dairy rule risk assessment. I'm not sure what our obligations are to present it to you, whether we just have to have it finished by the end of August or whether we have to actually have a commission meeting. We need to double check that. Another reason we may need to push this up. So we're looking at probably late April, early May, then we'll have a commission meeting. Does that
Okay,
sound right?
sounds great.
We'll get y'all a couple of.
You'll have the El Paso deal worked out with them?
Well, no, we won't have it worked. The report, the law, the language of the law says that by September 1st, we have to present it to a list of people, the governor, ag commissioner, you guys. But I'm not sure if that means you have to have a meeting or we just say, here it is, and then you would meet late. We need to double check that. But let's just look at late April, early May, May 6th. I've got some, May 6th is a date that on my calendar would work right now. So, and then we'll just move the trick working group up a month. How's that?
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Okay, if there's nothing else, then I call this meeting adjourned. Right before noon.